You have been told that acceptance means giving up. They made it sound like you must smile at your pain, forgive too quickly, and pretend the past did not break something inside you. But if that were true, why does acceptance feel so heavy? Why does letting go feel like losing a part of yourself? Why does peace feel strange when suffering has been your companion for so long? The truth is, acceptance feels hard, not because you are weak, but because your pain has slowly become the way you know yourself. When you have suffered for years, the wound stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like an identity. You become the strong one, the abandoned one, the betrayed one, the one who survived, the one who was never understood. And without noticing it, your mind begins to build a home inside the very pain it once wanted to escape. This is why peace can feel unfamiliar. This is why healing can feel empty. This is why the silence after suffering can feel more frightening than the suffering itself. Buddhist wisdom teaches that pain is part of life, but becoming the pain is where the deeper suffering begins. The Buddha did not ask you to deny what happened. He did not ask you to call your pain good. He asked you to look closely and see that what happened to you is real, but it is not the whole of who you are. Your suffering may have shaped your thoughts, your fears, your reactions, and your story, but it was never meant to become your permanent self. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you may begin to loosen. The old need to explain yourself through your wounds, the quiet attachment to being understood only through pain, the fear that without your suffering, you will no longer know who you are. Slowly, you will begin to see that acceptance is not approval. Acceptance is not defeat. Acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is the moment you stop letting the past decide the size of your life. This is not just a lesson about letting go. This is a return to the self beneath the wound, the self beneath the survival, the self beneath the story you have repeated for too long. And as Buddhist wisdom reminds us, freedom does not begin when pain disappears. Freedom begins when you stop calling the pain your name. Are you ready? Let us begin. Before we go deeper, understand this clearly. Acceptance does not begin with peace. Many times it begins with a quiet sadness no one talks about. Because when suffering has been your identity for years, letting go does not feel like freedom at first. It feels like standing at the door of a house that hurt you, but still calling it home. A part of you wants to leave. Another part keeps whispering, "But who will I be without this pain?" There is a grief that comes with healing, and most people never speak about it. They talk about peace as if it arrives like sunlight through a window. They talk about acceptance as if it is soft, simple, and beautiful from the beginning. But for the person who has lived inside pain for too long, acceptance can feel like losing something familiar. It can feel like removing an old coat in winter, even when that coat is heavy, torn, and soaked with rain. It protected you once. It covered you once. It gave you a shape when life felt shapeless. So even when it is time to put it down, your hands may tremble. This is the hidden grief of letting go of a painful identity. It is not only the grief of what happened to you, it is the grief of who you became because of what happened to you. It is the grief of the personality you built to survive, the guarded smile, the careful silence, the habit of expecting disappointment before it arrives, the quick fear when someone gets too close, the sharp memory that does not let you relax. The part of you that learned to watch life instead of fully entering it. These things may have made life smaller, but they also made life feel safer. And this is why letting go can feel confusing. You may think healing should feel like joy immediately, but sometimes the first feeling is emptiness. Not because healing is wrong, but because pain once gave your life a strange kind of structure. It told you who you were. It gave you a reason for your anger. It explained your distance. It justified your fear. It gave you a story to carry when you did not know how else to understand yourself. So when Buddhist wisdom asks you to loosen your grip on suffering, it is not asking you to throw away your truth. It is asking you to stop mistaking your wound for your whole self. And that is not easy, because pain can become an identity very quietly. It does not always happen in one dramatic moment. It happens through repetition. You are hurt, and the mind remembers. You are disappointed, and the heart begins to prepare. You are rejected, and the body learns to tighten. You are misunderstood, and something inside you decides, I must never be that open again. Over time, these decisions become habits. The habits become your way of seeing. Your way of seeing becomes your personality. Then one day you do not say, I experienced pain. You say, this is who I am. This is where the hidden grief begins. Because letting go of suffering means letting go of the version of you that suffering created. And that version may have worked very hard to protect you. It may have kept you alive emotionally. It may have helped you keep moving when you had no strength left. It may have taught you how to read people, how to avoid danger, how to survive loneliness, how to keep your heart from being touched too deeply. So when you begin to heal, do not be surprised if part of you feels loyalty to the old self. That old self suffered with you. That old self stayed when others left. That old self carried the burden when you did not know how to put it down. But here is the question Buddhist wisdom gently places before you. Must the one who protected you also be the one who imprisons you? A wall can protect a house from a storm, but if the wall has no door, the same wall becomes a prison. Your painful identity may have protected you during a season when you had no better tools. It may have helped you explain what felt unbearable. But if you continue living only as the wounded one, the betrayed one, the abandoned one, the overlooked one, the unlucky one, the broken one, then pain does not remain a chapter. It becomes the narrator of your entire life. This is why acceptance feels so hard. It is not only acceptance of the past. It is acceptance of the fact that you are allowed to be more than what the past made you. And strangely, that can feel frightening, because suffering often gives a person a role. It gives them a kind of emotional position in the world. They know how to speak from pain. They know how to defend pain. They know how to explain themselves through pain. They know how to receive sympathy through pain. They know how to justify distance through pain. But peace asks for something new. Peace asks, who are you when you are no longer proving how much you hurt? That question can feel like a small death, not the death of your life, but the death of an identity, the death of the old explanation, the death of the story that once made everything make sense. And every identity, even a painful one, resists dying. The mind does not always cling to what is good. The mind clings to what is known. A painful home may still feel safer than an unknown road. A familiar sadness may feel easier than an unfamiliar peace. A wound you understand may feel less frightening than a future you cannot control. This is why someone can say they want peace, but still return to the same thoughts every night. They say they want to move on, but they keep reopening the same inner argument. They say they are tired of being defined by the past, but they keep using the past as the first sentence of who they are. This does not mean they are fake. It means the mind has confused familiarity with safety. It has lived so long under the shadow of suffering that sunlight feels strange on the skin. Buddhist wisdom does not judge this. It observes it. It says, look closely. That is one of the most powerful things about the Buddhist path. It does not rush to shame you for clinging. It does not shout at you to let go. It invites you to notice the clinging itself, to see how the hand tightens, to see what the mind fears losing, to see how the self has been built around something painful, and to understand that awareness is the first doorway out. When you begin to observe your painful identity, you may notice how often it speaks for you. Before you try something new, it says, "People like me do not get good things." Before you trust someone, it says, "Remember what happened last time." Before you rest, it says, "Do not relax too much." Before you receive kindness, it says, "This will not last." Before you forgive yourself, it says, "You should have known better." This voice may sound like wisdom, but often it is fear wearing the clothes of wisdom. Real wisdom does not keep you trapped. Real wisdom protects without closing the door on life. Real wisdom remembers the past without forcing you to live there. Real wisdom can say, "Yes, that hurt," without adding, "Therefore I must remain wounded forever." The hidden grief of letting go is also the grief of losing the attention pain once attracted. This is a delicate truth, and it must be handled with compassion. Some people have only felt seen when they were suffering. They were ignored when they were calm, dismissed when they were okay, overlooked when they were quiet. But when they were in pain, people finally listened. People finally asked questions. People finally treated them with softness. So the heart learned something dangerous. Pain is how I become visible. When this happens, healing can feel like disappearing. If your pain was the language through which people understood you, who will understand you when you become peaceful? If your struggle was the proof that your life mattered, what proves your worth when you no longer display your wounds? If your suffering was the only place where you received tenderness, why would the heart not fear letting it go? This is why compassion is necessary. You cannot shame yourself out of a painful identity. Shame only pushes the identity deeper. You cannot insult yourself into freedom. You cannot say, "Why am I still like this?" and expect the heart to open. The heart opens when it feels safe enough to release what it no longer needs. And Buddhist compassion begins by saying, "Of course you held on. You were trying to survive. Of course you became guarded. You were trying not to be hurt again. Of course you built meaning around your pain. You were trying to make sense of something that felt senseless." But compassion does not mean staying stuck. Compassion means you stop beating yourself for the chains while still learning how to remove them. Letting go of a painful identity also means grieving the pride you built around survival. Many people do not only suffer from pain, they become proud of how much pain they endured. They may not say it openly, but deep inside there is a feeling of, "Look what I survived. Look how much I carried. Look how strong I had to be." And there is truth in that. Survival deserves respect. Your endurance matters. The fact that you are still here, still breathing, still trying to understand, still reaching for peace, is not small. But the danger begins when survival becomes the only identity you trust. If you only know yourself as the one who survived pain, then peace may feel like a threat to your importance. You may wonder, if I stop suffering, does that mean what I went through was not serious? If I become happy, will people think it did not hurt? If I stop carrying this story, am I betraying the person I was? No. Healing does not erase the truth of your suffering. A scar does not need to stay open to prove the wound was real. You do not need to bleed forever for your pain to be valid. You do not need to remain angry for the past to matter. You do not need to keep living as the injured self to honor what you endured. Buddhist wisdom teaches that everything changes, not because nothing matters, but because clinging to any form as permanent creates suffering. Even the wounded self is not fixed. Even the identity formed in pain can soften. Even the story you have repeated for years can lose its power when you stop feeding it with constant belief. This does not happen by force. It happens through seeing. You begin to see that your painful identity is made of thoughts, memories, emotions, body reactions, and repeated stories. It feels solid because you have lived with it for so long, but when you look closely, it is always changing. Some days the pain is loud, some days it is quiet. Some moments you feel trapped, other moments you laugh and forget it for a while. Sometimes you feel like the old self. Sometimes another self appears, softer, lighter, more open. This means the painful identity is not as permanent as it claims to be. In Buddhism, this matters deeply. The self we defend so fiercely is not a fixed object. It is more like a river than a stone. It is moving, changing, forming, dissolving. But suffering makes the river feel frozen. It says, "This is me. This is who I am. This is who I will always be." Acceptance begins when you notice that the voice saying "always" is usually fear speaking. Life is not asking you to become someone false. Life is asking you to stop believing that the version of you shaped by pain is the final version. And yet there is grief in that, because even when a painful identity limits you, it also gives you something to hold. Letting it go can feel like walking without the old map. You may not know how to speak without mentioning what hurt you. You may not know how to relate to people without expecting them to disappoint you. You may not know how to rest without feeling guilty. You may not know how to receive love without suspicion. You may not know how to be calm without waiting for the next problem. This is not failure. This is the awkward beginning of freedom. When a bird has lived in a cage for years, the open sky is not immediately comforting. The cage was small, but it was known. The sky is wide, but it is uncertain. Healing can feel like that. A painful identity is a cage the mind learned to decorate. It put names on the walls. It placed memories in the corners. It called the smallness safety. Then one day the door opens, and instead of flying immediately, the heart hesitates. Not because it loves the cage, but because it does not yet trust the sky. This is why acceptance must be gentle. The mind cannot be forced into freedom. It must be shown again and again that peace is not danger, calm is not weakness, softness is not foolishness. Letting go is not losing yourself. It is meeting the part of yourself that was buried underneath the struggle. There is a self beneath the painful identity, not a perfect self, not a self that has never been touched by sorrow, but a deeper self, a quieter self, a self that does not need to turn every wound into a name. This self may have been hidden for years beneath defense, anger, sadness, and fear, but it is still there. You may hear it in brief moments, when you feel tired of repeating the same story, when you want peace more than you want to be right, when you realize that protecting yourself from all pain has also protected you from joy, when you feel a small desire to live without carrying your past into every room. That desire is important. It may be small, but it is a doorway. The hidden grief of letting go also includes grief for the time you lost. When you begin to heal, you may look back and feel sadness for the years spent inside survival, years of overthinking, years of waiting for apologies that never came, years of explaining yourself to people who were not listening, years of making decisions from fear, years of seeing yourself through what happened instead of what was still possible. This grief can be sharp. It can make acceptance feel unfair. You may think, first I suffered, and now I must also do the work of healing. Yes, and that truth can feel heavy, but Buddhist wisdom would not call this punishment. It would call it awakening. Not awakening as something loud or dramatic, but awakening as the moment you see clearly. You see that continuing to suffer does not return the lost years. You see that staying loyal to pain does not repair what broke. You see that making an identity out of suffering does not protect the child inside you, the younger self inside you, or the heart that was hurt. It only keeps them living in the same room where the pain happened. At some point, compassion asks you to stop making your present life a monument to your past pain. This does not mean forgetting. Forgetting is not the goal. Denial is not the goal. Pretending is not the goal. The goal is to remember without becoming trapped, to acknowledge without becoming consumed, to honor what happened without building your entire identity around it, to say, this was part of my path, without saying, this is all I am. That difference is small in words, but enormous in life. One statement closes the door, the other opens it. When suffering becomes your identity, you may feel a secret fear that peace will make you ordinary. Pain can create a sense of depth. It can make you feel different from others, more serious, more aware, more emotionally complex. Sometimes people begin to believe that without their suffering, they will become shallow, simple, or unnoticed. But this is another trick of the wounded mind. Peace does not make you empty. Peace makes you available to love without always preparing for loss, available to rest without guilt, available to learn without the past interrupting every lesson, available to see beauty without asking when it will be taken away. Your depth does not come from staying wounded. Your depth comes from seeing clearly. It comes from meeting life with an open heart after pain tried to close it. It comes from understanding suffering without worshipping it. It comes from becoming kind without becoming blind. It comes from being strong without needing to stay hardened. This is the kind of depth Buddhist wisdom points toward, not the depth of endless sorrow, but the depth of presence, the depth of being able to sit with pain without turning it into a throne, the depth of being able to say, pain is here, instead of, I am pain, the depth of knowing that every feeling rises, stays for a while, and passes, the depth of not building a permanent self out of a passing storm. But to reach that place, grief must be allowed. You may need to grieve the old identity before you can release it. You may need to thank it for protecting you. You may need to admit that it helped you survive, even while seeing that it cannot help you live fully. You may need to speak inwardly with tenderness and say, I know why you became this way. I know why you held on. I know why you were afraid. But we do not have to live only from this place anymore. That kind of inner speech matters. Many people try to heal by attacking the wounded self. They call themselves dramatic. They call themselves weak. They call themselves stuck. But the wounded self does not release under attack. It releases under understanding. Just as a frightened child does not calm down because someone shouts, "Stop being afraid," the wounded part of you does not soften because you shame it. It softens when it feels heard. This is where acceptance begins to become real. Not as a word, not as a spiritual idea, not as something you say to look wise, but as a living practice. Acceptance says, I see the pain. I see the identity built around the pain. I see the fear of letting it go. I see the grief of not knowing who I am without it. And I will not run from any of this. That is powerful because most people either cling to pain or try to escape it. Acceptance does neither. It sits down in the middle and looks honestly. It does not say, this did not matter. It does not say, this must define me forever. It says, this happened, and now I will learn how to meet it without becoming it. The more you practice this, the more space appears. At first, the space may last only a few seconds, a moment when you notice the old story rising, but you do not immediately enter it. A moment when sadness comes, but you do not call it your whole life. A moment when someone misunderstands you, but you do not collapse into the identity of the one who is never seen. A moment when you remember the past, but you do not let it take control of your entire body. These small moments are not small. They are the first signs that the painful identity is losing its grip. Freedom often begins quietly, not with a grand announcement, not with a perfect breakthrough, not with sudden joy. It begins when you stop introducing yourself to yourself through your wounds. It begins when you notice that you are more than the thing you survived. It begins when you realize that the old pain may still visit, but it no longer has the right to move in and rearrange the whole house. And yes, there will be grief. Let there be grief. Grieve the years you spent guarded. Grieve the version of you that never got to feel safe. Grieve the softness you had to hide. Grieve the dreams that pain interrupted. Grieve the ways you learned to shrink, defend, explain, and expect less. But do not confuse grief with failure. Sometimes grief is the sound of the heart making room. Sometimes tears come not because you are going backward, but because something frozen is finally beginning to melt. Letting go of a painful identity does not mean you wake up one day and become untouched by life. It means you stop using pain as the center of your name. It means you allow yourself to be complex, not only wounded. Tender, not only guarded. Wise, not only hurt. Strong, not only because you endured, but because you are willing to live again without hiding behind what happened. This is the quiet courage acceptance asks from you, not to deny the past, not to force happiness, not to become someone else overnight, but to stand before the identity suffering created and gently ask, is this still the only way to be me? And when that question enters the heart, a new path begins, because the old self may still be there, but it is no longer the only voice. Beneath it, something calmer begins to rise, something that does not need to prove pain, something that does not need to repeat the story to exist, something that knows the wound was real, but also knows that your life is wider than the wound. That is where acceptance begins to change meaning. It no longer feels like betrayal. It no longer feels like defeat. It becomes an act of mercy, mercy toward the self that suffered, mercy toward the self that survived, mercy toward the self that is ready, slowly and honestly, to become more than a painful identity. And this is where the path becomes even more surprising, because once you begin to loosen the painful identity, you may expect peace to rush in like a blessing. You may expect the mind to feel relieved, grateful, open and ready. But often the first thing that rises is not peace. It is fear, a quiet fear, a strange fear. The kind of fear that makes no sense on the surface because you are finally moving toward the very thing you said you wanted. Yet something inside you steps back and whispers, "Be careful, do not trust this calm too quickly." That is the part no one explains. After years of survival, peace can feel suspicious. There are people who have lived so long in emotional storms that calm does not feel like safety anymore. It feels like the silence before something bad happens. They may not say it out loud, but their body says it for them. The shoulders stay tight, the stomach waits. The thoughts keep scanning. The heart refuses to rest completely. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind searches for what could become wrong. And if it finds nothing, it may create something, because an anxious mind often prefers a known problem to an unknown stillness. This is not because the person loves suffering. It is because the mind has been trained by repetition. When life has disappointed you again and again, the mind begins to believe that peace is only a trap. It says, "Last time I relaxed, something hurt me. Last time I trusted, someone changed. Last time I felt hopeful, life embarrassed me. Last time I opened my heart, I paid for it." So the mind begins to guard against peace, as if peace itself is dangerous. This is why acceptance can feel so difficult when suffering has become your identity. You are not only releasing pain, you are also entering a state your nervous system may not recognize. Peace may be good, but it may not feel familiar. And the human mind often chooses familiar pain over unfamiliar freedom, not because pain is better, but because the familiar gives the illusion of control. If you grew up or lived through seasons where you had to be constantly alert, your mind may have learned to survive by predicting trouble. It became a watcher. It studied people's faces. It listened for changes in tone. It noticed silence too quickly. It prepared answers before questions came. It expected rejection before anyone spoke. It learned to read the room like a person reading dark clouds before rain. At one time, this may have helped you. It may have protected you from disappointment, conflict, humiliation, or emotional harm. But the same mind that helped you survive may later struggle to let you rest. This is the strange cost of survival. The very tools that protected you can become the tools that exhaust you. A mind shaped by survival does not ask, "Is this moment peaceful?" It asks, "How long will this peace last?" It does not ask, "Can I enjoy this kindness?" It asks, "What will this person want from me later?" It does not ask, "Can I breathe now?" It asks, "What am I missing?" That question, "What am I missing?" becomes the private music of a tired mind. Even in calm places, it keeps playing. Buddhist wisdom sees this clearly. It teaches that the mind is shaped by conditions. The thoughts you repeat, the fears you feed, the memories you revisit, the reactions you practice, all of these become grooves in the mind. Like water flowing down the same path again and again, the mind learns where to go. If it has flowed toward fear for many years, it will not immediately flow toward peace just because you understand one lesson. This is why patience is necessary. You are not only changing your thoughts, you are retraining the direction of your inner life. Peace frightens the survival mind because peace removes its favorite job. The survival mind wants to protect, predict, prepare, and prevent. It wants to stay useful. It wants to stay busy. It believes that if it stops working for even one moment, pain will enter through the open door. So when life becomes quiet, the survival mind may feel unemployed. It does not know what to do with stillness. It has built its identity around guarding the gate, and now peace comes and says, "You can put the weapon down." But the mind answers, "If I put it down, who will protect us?" This is why calm can feel uncomfortable. You may sit in silence and suddenly feel restless. You may have a day without conflict and still feel uneasy. You may receive love and begin searching for signs of withdrawal. You may finish a difficult season and then feel more anxious than you felt during the struggle. This happens because during struggle, the mind had a clear target. It knew what to fight. It knew where to place its energy. But after the struggle, when there is no immediate enemy, the mind turns inward and begins to feel the weight it was too busy to feel before. Survival can delay feeling. Peace brings feeling to the surface. This is one reason people fear peace. When the noise stops, the buried emotions begin to speak. The grief that was postponed, the anger that was swallowed, the fear that was hidden beneath responsibility, the loneliness that was covered by busyness, the exhaustion that was ignored because there was no time to fall apart. During survival, you may not have had space to process anything. You simply kept going. You woke up, handled life, endured what came, and told yourself there was no choice. But when peace arrives, all the unfelt things may finally come forward. And the mind, not understanding this, may think peace is the problem. But peace is not the problem. Peace is the space where the truth finally feels safe enough to appear. This is why Buddhist practice does not rush people into false calm. It does not say, just be peaceful. It asks you to sit, breathe, notice, and allow what is here. That sounds simple, but it is not easy for a mind trained by survival. Because when you sit quietly, you may meet the parts of yourself you avoided. You may meet the fear beneath your anger. You may meet the sadness beneath your control. You may meet the tenderness beneath your hardness. You may meet the childlike part of you that wanted safety, but learned to call vigilance wisdom. And when these parts appear, the first reaction may be resistance. You may want to distract yourself. You may want to pick up your phone, start an argument in your head, replay an old memory, plan the future, eat when you are not hungry, work when you are tired, or find something to worry about. Not because you are foolish, but because stillness can expose what motion helped you avoid. The mind fears peace because peace takes away the hiding places. There is also another reason peace feels threatening after years of survival. Peace asks you to stop proving that your pain was real. When you are still struggling, the evidence is visible. Your tired face, your guarded behavior, your emotional distance, your anxiety, your tears, your anger, your constant explanations, all of these seem to say, see, I was hurt. See, it mattered. See, I am not making it up. But as you heal, the outer signs may begin to fade. You may smile more. You may rest more. You may stop talking about the old wound every day. You may respond with calm where you once reacted with pain. And a part of you may fear that if you look healed, people will forget what happened. Worse, you may fear that you will forget yourself. This is a deep fear. The fear that peace will erase the record of suffering. The fear that if you stop hurting, the pain will lose its witness. But Buddhist wisdom offers a different way. It says that you do not need to keep suffering alive in order to honor what happened. Awareness can remember without clinging. Compassion can validate without reopening. Wisdom can carry the lesson without carrying the wound as a permanent name. A healed person is not someone who denies the storm. A healed person is someone who no longer needs to live as the storm. The mind fears this because it has mistaken intensity for truth. Many people believe that if they are not deeply upset, then what happened must not matter. If they are not angry, then they must have accepted injustice. If they are not grieving every day, then they must have abandoned the past. But this is not true. Peace does not reduce the truth. Peace changes your relationship with the truth. You can know something hurt you without letting it rule your breath. You can remember someone failed you without carrying them into every new room. You can admit life was unfair without making unfairness your entire identity. Survival teaches the mind to hold tightly. Buddhism teaches the mind to see clearly. These are not the same. Holding tightly feels powerful at first. It gives the mind something to do. It gives pain a shape. But seeing clearly brings freedom. It lets you recognize that a memory is a memory, not a command. A feeling is a feeling, not a life sentence. A thought is a thought, not a god. A wound is a wound, not your name. The survival mind is afraid of peace because peace also asks for trust, not blind trust in people, not childish trust that nothing painful will ever happen again, but a deeper trust that you can meet life without living permanently braced against it. This kind of trust is not easy when your past taught you that safety can vanish. So the mind stays armed. It says, I will relax after everything is certain. But everything is never certain. Life does not offer that kind of agreement. So the mind waits for a certainty that never arrives, and the body pays the price. Buddhist wisdom does not promise a life without change. In fact, it teaches the opposite. Everything changes. People change. Feelings change. Bodies change. Circumstances change. Plans change. Even pain changes. This may sound frightening at first, But when understood deeply, it becomes a doorway to peace. Because if everything changes, then your suffering is not permanent either. The survival mind uses impermanence as a reason to fear. The awakened mind uses impermanence as a reason to release. This is a major turning point. The same truth that once made you anxious can become the truth that frees you. The survival mind says, because things change, I must control everything. Buddhist wisdom says, because things change, I must stop clinging as if anything can be held forever. The survival mind says, because people may leave, I must not open my heart. Buddhist wisdom says, because nothing is permanent, I must be fully present while love is here. The survival mind says, because pain may return, I must never rest. Buddhist wisdom says, because pain may come and go, I do not need to become pain before it arrives. The mind fears peace because peace feels like lowering the shield. But there is a difference between lowering the shield and becoming defenseless. Peace does not mean you lose discernment. Peace does not mean you ignore danger. Peace does not mean you trust everyone. Peace does not mean you become soft in a way that lets the world harm you. True peace is alert without being anxious. It is wise without being closed. It is careful without being controlled by fear. It is awake, but not at war with every moment. This difference matters. Many people avoid peace because they confuse it with weakness. They think, if I become calm, people will take advantage of me. If I forgive inwardly, I will forget the lesson. If I stop being angry, I will lose my strength. If I become soft, life will break me again. But calm is not the opposite of strength. Calm is strength that no longer needs to shout. Acceptance is not surrendering your boundaries. It is surrendering the inner battle that keeps hurting you after the outer event has passed. A peaceful person can still say no. A peaceful person can still leave. A peaceful person can still speak truth. A peaceful person can still protect their life. The difference is that they do not act from panic as often. They do not let old wounds drive new choices without examination. They do not punish the present for what the past did. They do not confuse every discomfort with danger. Years of survival can make the body addicted to urgency. Not addiction in a moral sense, but in the sense that the body becomes used to high alert. Stress hormones, rushing thoughts, tight muscles, shallow breathing, constant checking, emotional tension, all of these become normal. Then when peace comes, the body may feel strangely empty, almost bored, even unsafe. The mind may think something is missing, when what is missing is the old emergency. This is why some people create conflict when life becomes calm. They may not mean to. They may start questioning good things, testing kind people, reopening old arguments, doubting every blessing, or making small issues feel huge. Their system is not used to ease. It knows how to function in pressure, but not how to receive calm. It knows how to survive chaos, but not how to relax into enough. This can be painful to realize, but it can also be liberating, because once you see the pattern, you stop blaming the present for discomfort that belongs to the past. You begin to say, this peace feels strange because my mind is learning a new language. You stop assuming that unease means something is wrong. Sometimes unease simply means something old is leaving, and something new has not yet become familiar. This is where practice becomes important. Peace must be practiced like a skill, not chased like a prize, not forced like a performance. Practiced. You practice by noticing a calm moment and staying with it for a little longer. You practice by breathing when the mind wants to invent a problem. You practice by receiving kindness without immediately searching for its hidden cost. You practice by letting a good day be a good day without asking when it will be ruined. You practice by telling the body gently and repeatedly, this is not danger, This is peace. We are learning. That last phrase is powerful. We are learning. It removes shame. It reminds you that peace is not something you failed to have. It is something your system may not have been taught. If your mind learned survival through repetition, it can learn peace through repetition too. This is not quick, but it is possible. The mind that learned to fear can learn to soften. The body that learned to brace can learn to breathe. The heart that learned to expect loss can learn to stay open without becoming careless. In Buddhist practice, the breath is often used because the breath is always present. The breath does not ask you to solve your whole life. It only asks you to return. One breath, then another, then another. For a survival mind, this return can feel too simple. The mind wants a complex solution because its pain feels complex. But sometimes the first doorway out of suffering is simple presence. Not because breathing fixes everything, but because it brings you back from the imagined danger into the living moment. When you breathe with awareness, you are teaching the mind that this moment can be held without panic. You are telling the body that it does not have to live 3 disasters ahead. You are practicing being here instead of being trapped in what happened or what might happen. This is not a small thing. A mind that has survived for years often lives everywhere except here. It lives in the old room, the old conversation, the old betrayal, the next possible wound, the next possible disappointment. The breath brings it back to now, and now is where peace begins. Not in a perfect future, not after every fear disappears, not after every person understands you, not after the past becomes fair. Now, in the small space where you notice your hand gripping and choose to loosen it slightly, in the small pause before answering from fear, in the small moment when you feel sadness without becoming the sadness, in the quiet decision not to turn a peaceful evening into a courtroom for old pain. The mind fears peace after years of survival because peace feels like a loss of control. But what survival calls control is often only tension. It is not true control to worry all night. It is not true control to rehearse every possible betrayal. It is not true control to stay emotionally distant from everything that could touch you. It is not true control to live prepared for pain every second. That is not control. That is exhaustion wearing a crown. True control is different. It is the ability to choose your response. It is the ability to notice a thought without obeying it. It is the ability to feel fear without letting fear become the driver. It is the ability to say, this old pattern is rising, but I do not have to become it. This is the freedom Buddhist wisdom points toward. Not control over life, but freedom from being controlled by every inner storm. There is another quiet reason the mind fears peace. Peace may reveal the choices you now have. When you are in survival, you can say, I have no choice. I am just trying to get through. And sometimes that is true. But when peace begins, choice returns. You can choose how to live, who to become, what to stop carrying, what to build, what to forgive, what to leave, what to nourish. Choice is beautiful, but it can also feel heavy, because choice brings responsibility. A person who has lived through pain may fear this responsibility. They may wonder, if I am no longer only a victim of what happened, then what do I do now? If I am more than my wound, then how do I live? If I cannot blame every part of my life on the past forever, what must I begin to change? These questions can feel uncomfortable, but they are not cruel. They are signs that life is returning to your hands. Buddhist wisdom does not deny that causes and conditions shape us. It understands deeply that what happened to you matters. But it also teaches that awareness creates a new condition, Once you see clearly, you are no longer only repeating the old pattern unconsciously. You can begin again, not by rejecting your past, but by refusing to let it be the only force shaping your future. This is where peace becomes courageous. Peace is not passive. Peace requires courage because it asks you to stop rehearsing pain as your protection. It asks you to stop confusing worry with preparation. It asks you to stop believing that being tense means being safe. It asks you to allow good moments without punishing them with suspicion. It asks you to let your body learn that not every quiet room contains a hidden threat. For someone who has never lived in survival, this may sound simple, but for someone who has, this is deep work. It is the work of telling the mind many times, "Thank you for trying to protect me, but we do not need to live like danger is always at the door." It is the work of touching peace gently, then stepping back when needed, then returning again. It is the work of learning that calm is not a trick. Calm is not laziness. Calm is not denial. Calm is a home the heart may have forgotten, but can still remember. Peace may feel unfamiliar, but unfamiliar does not mean false. This is something you must hold close. Many good things will feel strange at first if your past was filled with pain. Healthy love may feel boring because it does not create emotional emergencies. Stability may feel dull because it does not keep your nervous system entertained with fear. Kindness may feel suspicious because it does not demand that you earn it through suffering. Rest may feel undeserved because you are used to measuring your worth by how much you endure. But strange does not mean wrong. Sometimes strange means new. Sometimes strange means safe. Sometimes strange means you are no longer living inside the old pattern. The mind fears peace because peace asks it to stop being loyal to suffering. And loyalty is a powerful thing. You may feel loyal to the version of yourself that survived, loyal to the memories, loyal to the pain that shaped you, loyal to the anger that gave you strength, loyal to the grief that kept love alive. But there is a loyalty deeper than staying wounded. There is loyalty to your freedom, loyalty to your breath, loyalty to the life still waiting beneath the old story, loyalty to the part of you that wants to live, not just survive. This is not betrayal, it is maturity. It is the moment you understand that you can honor what you survived without making survival your permanent address. Peace after survival may arrive slowly. It may come in small signs. The first time you do not answer an old fear immediately. The first time you let someone be kind without testing them. The first time you rest and do not apologize for it. The first time you hear silence and do not fill it with worry. The first time you remember the past and feel sadness, but not the old collapse. These moments may not look dramatic from the outside, but inside they are revolutions. A person who has lived in survival knows how powerful these small moments are, because the real victory is not always loud. Sometimes the real victory is lying down at night and not fighting the same old battle in your mind. Sometimes it is eating a meal without rushing. Sometimes it is walking slowly without feeling guilty. Sometimes it is allowing laughter without thinking you are betraying your sorrow. Sometimes it is letting the body soften for one breath longer than it did yesterday. This is how peace becomes familiar. Not all at once, but through repeated kindness toward your own nervous system, through gentle awareness, through not attacking yourself when fear returns, through understanding that fear of peace is not failure. It is a sign that your survival patterns are being touched, and when they are touched, they may protest. Let them protest. Listen without obeying. Respect their history without giving them the steering wheel. You can say inwardly, "I know why you are afraid. I know you learn to expect the worst. I know peace feels unsafe because you have seen calm break before. But this moment is not that moment. This breath is not that day. This room is not that old room. This person is not everyone who hurt us. This life is still open. That kind of inner language begins to heal the split between the part of you that wants peace and the part of you that fears it. You stop treating the fearful mind as an enemy. You treat it as an old guard who has worked too long without rest. You do not mock it. You do not let it rule. You thank it, then teach it a new way. This is where Buddhist compassion and Buddhist wisdom meet. Wisdom sees that fear is conditioned. Compassion understands why. Wisdom knows fear is not the whole truth. Compassion does not shame it for appearing. Together, they help you move forward without violence toward yourself. And slowly, peace stops feeling like a threat. It becomes less like an empty room and more like a quiet garden. At first, you may stand at the gate, unsure whether you are allowed to enter. Then you take one step, then another. You notice there is no need to perform here, no need to prove pain, no need to defend your wound, no need to explain your whole history before you can breathe. You can simply be. And for someone who has lived in survival, simply being may be the most unfamiliar freedom of all. This is what the mind must learn. Peace is not the absence of strength. Peace is what strength becomes when it no longer has to fight every second. Peace is not forgetting. Peace is remembering without being owned. Peace is not weakness. Peace is the courage to stop living as if the past is still happening. Peace is not the end of awareness. Peace is awareness without panic. So if peace feels hard, do not assume you are broken. Maybe your mind is standing at the edge of a life it has never known. Maybe your body is waiting for danger because danger once arrived when you were unprepared. Maybe your heart is afraid to open because opening once cost too much. But none of this means peace is impossible. It only means peace must be introduced gently. You do not force the mind out of survival. You invite it. You show it evidence. You let calm stay for a moment. You let the breath deepen. You let the shoulders drop. You let silence exist without turning it into fear. You let one peaceful day remain one peaceful day. You let yourself enjoy something small without asking sorrow for permission. And with time, the mind begins to understand. It begins to see that peace is not here to erase your story. It is here to stop your story from hurting you in the same way. It is not here to make you naive. It is here to make you free. It is not here to take away the wisdom you earned. It is here to remove the fear that attached itself to that wisdom. Then acceptance becomes less frightening, because you begin to realize that accepting peace does not mean denying survival. It means survival has done its job. It carried you through the fire. It kept you moving when life felt unbearable. It taught you to endure. But now, if you are willing, peace can teach you something survival never could. It can teach you how to live without always bracing, how to trust the present moment one breath at a time, how to belong to your life without needing pain to explain you. And maybe that is the deeper freedom. Not that the mind never feels fear again, but that fear no longer decides what peace is allowed to mean. And once you understand that the mind can fear peace after years of survival, another truth begins to appear. The mind does not only fear peace because peace is unfamiliar. It fears peace because suffering has become familiar, not comfortable in a joyful way, not healthy, not something the heart truly wants, but familiar in the way an old room is familiar, even if the air inside it is heavy. Familiar in the way a path becomes easy to walk because your feet have walked it too many times. Familiar in the way a sad song can hurt you, yet still feel like it belongs to you. This is how suffering quietly becomes a home. It does not knock loudly. It does not announce itself. It enters through repeated disappointments, repeated fears, repeated losses, repeated memories, and repeated thoughts. At first, suffering feels like an unwanted visitor. Then it stays longer than expected. Then the mind begins to arrange itself around it. And after some time, what once felt like pain starts to feel like a place you know how to live inside. That is the dangerous part. Not because you chose suffering with full awareness, but because the mind can normalize almost anything when it has lived with it long enough. A person can become used to tension, used to sadness, used to expecting less, used to hiding what they feel, used to waking up with heaviness, used to carrying a story that hurts them, used to emotional hunger, used to being misunderstood, used to always preparing for something to go wrong. And when something becomes normal, the mind no longer questions it. It simply says, "This is life. This is me. This is how things are." But Buddhist wisdom asks you to pause before that conclusion. It asks you to look at what you have called normal. It asks you to ask, is this truly my nature, or is this what repeated pain taught me to accept? Because there is a great difference between who you are and what you have become used to carrying. A bird born in a cage may think the cage is the world. A heart raised in fear may think fear is wisdom. A mind trained by suffering may think peace is unrealistic. But none of these beliefs prove the cage is home. They only prove the cage has been there for too long. Suffering becomes familiar home when it gives the mind a pattern. Human beings are not only seekers of happiness, they are seekers of patterns. The mind wants to know what to expect. It wants a script. It wants a way to explain things. Even painful patterns can feel safer than no pattern at all. This is why some people keep returning to the same emotional places, the same types of people, the same disappointments, the same arguments, the same inner stories. Not because they enjoy being hurt, but because the mind already knows how to behave there. It knows how to be disappointed. It knows how to be guarded. It knows how to feel rejected. It knows how to prepare for loss. But it may not know how to receive kindness without suspicion. It may not know how to stay calm when nothing is wrong. It may not know how to live without the old emotional script. This is why suffering can feel strangely organized. It gives pain a routine. You wake up and the same thoughts are waiting. You move through the day and the same fears follow. You meet people and the same expectations rise. You sit alone and the same memories open their doors. Over time, the mind begins to decorate this inner house. It places your identity on the walls. It puts old explanations in every room. It keeps a chair ready for regret, a bed ready for loneliness, a mirror that only shows the wounded version of you. Then one day, when peace knocks, the mind does not recognize it as home. It recognizes suffering. This is why people can feel uncomfortable when life becomes gentler. If you are used to being ignored, being seen may feel strange. If you are used to being blamed, being treated kindly may feel suspicious. If you are used to emotional distance, closeness may feel like a threat. If you are used to disappointment, consistency may feel unreal. The mind may say, "This cannot be trusted." But often it is not the present moment that is untrustworthy. It is the old home of suffering trying to pull you back because it knows how to survive there. Suffering becomes a home when it offers identity, routine, and explanation. It tells you why you are the way you are. It tells you why you do not try. It tells you why you keep distance. It tells you why you cannot rest. It tells you why you expect betrayal. It tells you why you do not hope too much. And because these explanations reduce confusion, the mind may hold them tightly. Pain becomes a map. A painful map, yes, but still a map. It says, this is where you came from. This is why you hurt. This is why you must stay careful. But Buddhist wisdom would ask, is this map leading you out or only helping you walk in circles? That question matters because not every explanation heals. Some explanations only keep the wound alive in a smarter language. You can understand why you suffer and still remain attached to suffering. You can name your patterns and still repeat them. You can know the roots of your pain and still water them every day with attention. This is why awareness must go deeper than analysis. Buddhism is not only interested in the story of pain, it is interested in the clinging beneath the story. It asks, what are you still holding? What do you fear losing? What do you keep returning to even though it burns your hands? The familiar home of suffering is built from small acts of returning. Every time the mind replays an old insult, it returns. Every time it rehearses a future rejection, it returns. Every time it chooses suspicion before curiosity, it returns. Every time it uses the past to judge the present before the present has a chance to speak, it returns. These returns may feel automatic, but they are not meaningless. They are the mind walking back to the house it knows, and because it has walked back so many times, the road feels natural. This is where practice begins, not by condemning the mind, but by noticing the road. Before you can leave a familiar home, you must know when you are entering it. You must notice the doorway. Maybe the doorway is a certain memory. Maybe it is a phrase someone says. Maybe it is silence from someone you care about. Maybe it is a feeling in the chest. Maybe it is the moment life becomes too calm and your mind starts searching for danger. The doorway is different for everyone, but the work is the same. Notice before you move in. When suffering has become familiar, the mind often mistakes intensity for belonging. If an emotion is loud, it feels true. If a memory is painful, it feels important. If a fear returns again and again, it feels wise. But repetition is not proof of truth. A lie repeated for years can still feel like truth to the body. A fear practiced for years can still feel like intuition. A wound touched again and again can still feel like identity. Buddhist wisdom invites you to stop bowing to every repeated thought as if it is a teacher. Some thoughts are not teachers. Some thoughts are echoes. Some are habits. Some are old alarms ringing in rooms where no fire is burning anymore. This does not mean you should ignore your pain. It means you should learn to distinguish pain that asks for care from pain that asks for control. Pain that asks for care says, please listen. Something inside needs tenderness. Pain that asks for control says, do not trust anything, do not change, stay here, keep watching, keep expecting the worst. One opens the heart toward healing. The other locks the heart inside survival. The difference may be subtle, but seeing it can change your life. Suffering becomes home when the mind begins to feel loyal to the struggle. This loyalty can be quiet. It may sound like, after everything I went through, I cannot just be okay. It may sound like, if I become peaceful, it will seem like the past did not matter. It may sound like, people like me do not get easy lives. It may sound like, I have always been this way. These sentences feel honest, but they can also become walls. They protect the pain from being questioned. They make healing feel like betrayal. They turn suffering into a family name you feel guilty for leaving behind. But there is no betrayal in becoming free. You are not dishonoring your past by no longer living there. You are not disrespecting your wounds by allowing them to close. You are not abandoning the younger version of yourself by stepping into peace. In truth, you may be doing the kindest thing for that younger self. You are saying, you did not suffer so I could build a prison from your pain. You suffered, and now I will carry us toward something wider. This is important because many people think healing means leaving the wounded self behind in a cruel way. It does not. Healing means taking that self with you, but not letting that self choose every direction from fear. It means holding the part that suffered, comforting it, understanding it, and slowly teaching it that the world is not only the place where pain happened. The world also contains breath, morning light, honest people, quiet strength, new choices, and moments that do not need to be ruined by old predictions. The familiar home of suffering may also be built through community. Sometimes people bond through pain, and pain becomes the language of connection. Conversations revolve around what went wrong, who hurt whom, what life took, what never healed. There can be comfort in being understood this way. It feels good when someone says, "I know exactly how that feels." It feels less lonely when another person recognizes your wound. But if every connection you have is built only around suffering, healing may feel like losing your place among people. You may fear that if you become lighter, you will no longer belong. This is one of the quiet traps of painful identity. The heart wants connection, and if pain is the only bridge it has known, it may resist crossing a different bridge. But true connection does not require you to stay wounded. The deepest relationships are not the ones that keep you locked inside the same sorrow forever. They are the ones that can honor your pain while also welcoming your growth. A person who truly loves your freedom will not need you to stay broken so the bond can remain familiar. Suffering becomes home when hope has disappointed you too many times. Hope can feel dangerous after repeated loss. It asks the heart to open toward possibility, and the heart remembers what happened when it opened before. So the mind may choose low expectations as a form of shelter. It says, "If I expect nothing, I cannot be hurt." This sounds protective, but it also slowly drains life of color. Low expectation may reduce shock, but it also reduces wonder. It may prevent certain disappointments, but it also prevents certain joys from entering fully. Buddhist wisdom does not teach hope in the shallow sense of forcing yourself to believe everything will go your way. It teaches something steadier. It teaches that each moment can be met freshly, not because life is guaranteed to be easy, but because clinging to old pain prevents you from seeing what is actually here. When suffering becomes home, the mind does not meet the present. It meets its own expectations. It does not see the person in front of it. It sees the shadow of someone from before. It does not hear the current silence. It hears every silence that once meant abandonment. It does not feel the current peace. It feels the old fear of losing peace. To leave the familiar home of suffering, you must begin seeing the present as the present. This may sound simple, but it is a deep spiritual discipline. It means asking, what is happening now, not what happened before? What is true in this moment, not what my fear predicts? What is this person showing me today, not what someone else taught me to expect? What is my body feeling now, not what my memory is adding? These questions help loosen the old spell. They bring the mind back from the house of suffering into the living room of now. The living moment is rarely as heavy as the story around it. A moment may contain sadness, but the story says, "I will always be sad." A moment may contain loneliness, but the story says, "No one will ever stay." A moment may contain uncertainty, but the story says, "Something terrible is coming." Suffering becomes home when the story grows larger than the moment. Buddhist mindfulness gently reverses this. It brings you back to direct experience. Breathing, sitting, feeling, hearing, seeing. One moment, one sensation, one thought passing. Not the whole future, not the whole past. Just this. This is how the walls begin to weaken. You do not demolish the familiar home of suffering by violence. You do not scream at yourself to be different. You do not pretend you are free when you are still afraid. You begin by opening windows. A moment of awareness is a window. A compassionate breath is a window. A new response is a window. Choosing not to replay a memory for the 10th time that day is a window. Letting someone's kindness exist without immediately doubting it is a window. Resting before exhaustion forces you is a window. Saying, "This is an old pattern," instead of "This is who I am," is a window. At first, the house may still be there, the old rooms may still call you, the familiar sadness may still offer its chair, the mind may still want to sit in the same place and tell the same story. But something has changed once you can see it. You are no longer fully asleep inside the pattern. You are standing at a distance, even a small distance, and that distance is sacred. In Buddhism, this space between awareness and reaction is where freedom begins, not after every wound is gone, but the moment you see the wound without becoming its servant. Suffering becomes home because the ego likes what is known. The ego is not always proud in a loud way. Sometimes it is simply the part of you that wants to remain consistent. It says, "This is my story, this is my role, this is the way I am seen, this is the way I protect myself." It fears change because change feels like disappearance. Even painful identity gives the ego something to hold. If you have been the one who was hurt for a long time, who are you when healing begins? If you have been the one who cannot trust, who are you when trust becomes possible? If you have been the one who expects loss, who are you when something stays? These questions can shake the inner house, but they are not meant to destroy you. They are meant to reveal that the self is wider than the role. You are not only the one who suffered, you are also the one who noticed the suffering. You are the one who wants freedom. You are the one who can learn. You are the one who can choose one breath differently. You are the one who can sit with pain and still not make pain your God. That noticing self, that aware self, is not trapped in the old rooms in the same way. It can walk out. Buddhist wisdom often points to non-attachment, but non-attachment is easily misunderstood. It does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean having no feelings. It does not mean cutting away your humanity. It means not turning passing experiences into permanent chains. It means letting pain be pain without turning it into a fixed identity. It means letting thoughts arise without signing your life over to them. It means letting memories appear without building a house around them. In simple language, non-attachment is the art of not moving into every feeling that visits you. This matters because suffering often begins as a visitor. Sadness visits, fear visits, shame visits, anger visits. But when the mind is unaware, it gives them keys. It lets them choose the furniture. It lets them write your name on the door. Then one day you think, "This is my home." But a feeling that visits is not the owner of your life. A thought that arrives is not the ruler of your future. A memory that hurts is not the whole truth of your being. To see this clearly, you must learn to sit at the doorway of your own mind. When suffering knocks, you do not have to slam the door. You also do not have to hand over the house. You can say, "I see you, I know you." You may sit for a moment, but you do not decide who I am. This is a gentle but powerful practice. It gives dignity to pain without giving pain control. Suffering becomes familiar when the body has learned its shape. You may feel it as heaviness in the chest, tightness in the throat, pressure behind the eyes, tension in the jaw, a restless stomach, tired arms, a back that never fully relaxes. These body memories can make suffering feel more real than peace. Peace may begin as a concept, but suffering feels physical. This is why healing must include the body. You cannot only think your way out of a home your whole body has memorized. A simple breath, a slower walk, unclenching the jaw, placing a hand on the chest, feeling your feet on the ground. These may seem small, but they teach the body a new address. They tell the body, "We are here now." Not back then, not in the old argument, not in the feared future, here. And every time the body returns to here, suffering loses a little of its claim to being home. The mind may still wander back. That is normal. Do not turn wandering into failure. The mind returns to familiar places until unfamiliar places become safe. If you have spent years living in inner tension, peace will need repetition before it feels natural. This is why Buddhist practice is called practice, not instant transformation. You return, return, return. Not because you are doing it wrong, but because returning is the path. A painful home can also feel familiar because it protects you from disappointment. If you stay inside suffering, you never have to risk joy. Joy is vulnerable. Love is vulnerable. Hope is vulnerable. Peace is vulnerable. To receive anything good is to admit that it matters, and if it matters, it can be lost. The survival mind knows this and says, better not to care too much, better not to open too much, better not to be too happy. So suffering becomes a shelter from the risk of joy. But what kind of shelter prevents you from living? There is wisdom in being careful, but there is also a point where carefulness becomes slow self-denial. You may avoid pain, but you also avoid love. You may avoid disappointment, but you also avoid surprise. You may avoid needing anyone, but you also avoid being held. You may avoid hope, but you also avoid the quiet strength hope can bring. The home of suffering may protect you from certain wounds, but it also keeps out the very warmth that could help you heal. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to throw yourself blindly into life. It asks you to be awake, to see the cost of clinging, to see that the shelter has become too small, to see that avoiding all risk is another form of suffering, to see that a heart cannot become free by refusing to feel anything deeply. Freedom is not numbness. Freedom is the ability to feel without being owned by what you feel. This is why acceptance is so important. Acceptance is not choosing the painful home. It is finally admitting you have been living there. It is turning on the light. It is seeing the rooms clearly. It is noticing the beliefs on the walls, the memories under the bed, the fears at the door, the old grief sitting quietly in the corner. Acceptance does not say, "This home is good." It says, "This is where I have been." And that honest seeing is the beginning of leaving. Many people cannot leave suffering because they cannot first admit how familiar it has become. They want to say, "I hate this pain. I want it gone." And that may be true, but another part may still return to it, feed it, defend it, explain life through it, and feel strange without it. Until you see both parts, healing remains incomplete. One part wants freedom. Another part fears the loss of the old home. Both must be seen. Both must be met with compassion. Both must be understood without letting the fearful part rule the whole life. There is a quiet moment in healing when you realize suffering was not only something you endured, it became a place you knew how to belong. This realization can bring sadness. It can bring regret. It can bring tenderness. You may look back and see how many times you returned to old pain because it felt like the only place that understood you. You may see how often you chose the familiar ache over the unknown possibility. You may see how much of your personality was shaped by rooms you never meant to live in. Do not use this realization to hurt yourself. Use it to wake up. The purpose of seeing is not self-blame. The purpose of seeing is freedom. If you punish yourself for having lived inside suffering, you only build another room in the same house, a room called shame, a room called "Why did I waste so much time?" A room called "What is wrong with me?" Do not move into that room either. Bow to the truth gently. Say, "I understand now. I did not know another way." but now I am learning. That sentence carries mercy. It allows the past to be real without making it a prison. It allows your old patterns to be understood without being worshipped. It allows change to begin without violence. The familiar home of suffering loses power when you stop calling it your only home. There may still be days you return there, days when old fears rise, days when sadness feels strangely comforting, days when the mind wants to close every window and sit with the same story again. But now you know something you did not know before. You know there is a door. You know the house is not the whole world. You know the self who notices suffering is already larger than suffering. And with that knowing, something begins to shift. You may not leave all at once. You may take one step, then return, then take another. You may stand outside for a moment, feel the open air, then feel afraid and go back inside. That is still part of the path. Do not despise small departures. Every moment you do not fully believe the old story is a departure. Every breath taken in awareness is a departure. Every time you choose presence over replaying pain, you are stepping beyond the familiar house. Eventually, peace becomes less foreign, not because life becomes perfect, but because you stop treating suffering as your address. You begin to find familiarity in softness, familiarity in silence, familiarity in honest breathing, familiarity in not reacting, familiarity in allowing one good moment to remain untouched, familiarity in the simple truth that you can be alive without constantly preparing to be hurt. This is how the home changes, not by denying the old house existed, but by building a new place inside yourself. A place where pain can visit without becoming king. A place where memories can arise without writing your future. A place where fear can speak without holding the keys. A place where the wounded self is welcomed, but not allowed to lock every door. And maybe this is the great turning point. Suffering becomes a familiar home quietly, but freedom can become familiar quietly too. Breath by breath, choice by choice, moment by moment. You can teach the mind a new path. You can teach the body a new safety. You can teach the heart that it does not have to live forever where it was hurt. The old home may still stand in memory, but you do not have to sleep there anymore. The old home may still stand in memory, but you do not have to sleep there anymore. And to understand how to leave it, you must first see what the house is made of. It is not made only of pain. Pain is often the first brick, yes, but the walls are built from interpretation, repetition, memory, fear, meaning, blame, regret, and the story the mind keeps telling about what happened. This is where Buddhist wisdom becomes very clear. There is pain, and then there is my story of pain. One is an experience. The other is an identity built around the experience. This difference can quietly change everything, because pain by itself is direct. It is the ache in the heart, the tightness in the chest, the sadness that rises when a memory returns, the disappointment when something breaks, the grief when something is lost. Pain is the first arrow. It touches you because you are human. No one goes through life without being touched by pain. The Buddha never denied this. He did not teach that a wise person feels nothing. He did not teach that spiritual maturity means becoming stone. He taught that pain exists, change exists, loss exists, sickness exists, aging exists, separation exists, and every human heart will meet them in one form or another. But then the mind adds a second arrow. The second arrow is the story. It says, "This should never have happened to me. My life is ruined. I will never be the same. No one can be trusted. I always lose what I love. I am the kind of person who gets abandoned. I am broken. I am unlucky. I am cursed. I am behind. I am not enough. I cannot move on. I must keep thinking about this. until it makes sense. The first arrow is the pain of what happened. The second arrow is the suffering created by what the mind keeps doing with what happened. And many people are not living only from the first arrow. They are living inside the second. This does not mean the first pain was small. It does not mean what happened was acceptable. It does not mean your wound was not real. It means the mind can take a real wound and build a whole world around it. A painful event may last a moment, a season or a chapter of life, but the story of pain can continue for years. It follows you into rooms where the original pain is no longer happening. It speaks through your reactions. It shapes the way you hear people. It decides what you expect. It tells you what is possible. It becomes the voice in your head that says, "Because this happened before, this is what life is." This is why two people can go through similar pain and carry it differently. One person may feel the pain, grieve it, learn from it, and slowly continue living. Another person may wrap the pain around their whole identity and begin to see every future moment through it. The difference is not that one person's pain mattered and the other person's did not. The difference is what the mind built after the pain arrived. Buddhist wisdom asks you to look carefully at this building process. It asks, what is the direct pain and what is the story you are adding? This question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. Because if you cannot tell the difference, you may spend your whole life trying to heal the story while ignoring the direct wound, or feeding the story while thinking you are honoring the wound. You may think you are being honest about your pain, when in truth you are repeating a painful identity so often that the mind no longer knows where the wound ends and the story begins. Direct pain is simple, even when it is intense. It may say, "This hurts." The story says, "This will always hurt." Direct pain says, "I feel lonely tonight." The story says, "I will always be alone." Direct pain says, "That person disappointed me." The story says, "Everyone will disappoint me." Direct pain says, "I made a mistake." The story says, "I am a failure." Direct pain says, "Something ended." The story says, "Nothing good stays in my life." Direct pain belongs to the moment. The story tries to turn the moment into your destiny. This is one of the great ways suffering becomes identity. The mind takes a passing state and gives it a permanent name. It turns "I feel rejected" into "I am rejected." It turns "I feel afraid" into "I am unsafe." It turns "I feel sadness" into "I am sadness." It turns "I was hurt" into "I am the wounded one." And once pain becomes grammar, once it moves from something you experience into something you believe you are, acceptance becomes difficult. Because now you are not just accepting pain. You are being asked to question the story that has been holding your sense of self together. That is why the mind resists. The story may hurt, but it is familiar. The story may limit you, but it gives shape to confusion. The story may make life smaller, but it also answers painful questions. Why am I guarded? Because I was betrayed. Why do I expect the worst? Because life has disappointed me. Why do I not trust peace? Because peace never lasted. These answers may contain truth, but if they become final answers, they stop being wisdom and become a prison. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to deny causes. It does not say, "Forget what shaped you." It says, "See what shaped you, but also see that you are still being shaped now." This is important. The past may have created conditions, but awareness creates new conditions. If pain taught you fear, awareness can teach you space. If disappointment taught you suspicion, compassion can teach you softness with boundaries. If loss taught you clinging, mindfulness can teach you how to hold life with open hands. The story says, "This is how I am because of what happened." Wisdom says, this is what happened, and now I can see how I am relating to it. That small shift is powerful. Pain is often unavoidable, but the story of pain can be examined. Pain may arise without permission, but the story grows through attention. Pain may be natural, but the identity around pain is conditioned. This means it has been learned, repeated, strengthened, and protected. And what has been learned can be understood. What has been repeated can be interrupted. What has been strengthened can be softened. What has been protected can be met with compassion and slowly released. The mind, however, often protects the story because the story gives pain meaning. Human beings struggle with meaningless hurt. When something painful happens, the mind does not want only to feel it. It wants to explain it. It wants to know why. Why did this happen? Why did they leave? Why was I treated that way? Why did life choose me for this? Why did I not see it coming? Why did I stay? Why did I trust? Why did I fail? These questions are human. They arise because the mind wants order. But if the questions do not receive a healing answer, they can become a wheel. The person keeps turning and turning, not because the turning brings freedom, but because stopping feels like surrendering to confusion. This is how the story of pain becomes endless. The mind keeps trying to create a version of the past that no longer hurts. It keeps rewriting conversations. It keeps looking for hidden signs. It keeps gathering evidence. It keeps placing blame. It keeps defending itself before an invisible judge. And after a while, the story is no longer helping the wound heal. It is keeping the wound open so the mind can keep working on it. Buddhist wisdom teaches that some freedom comes not from finding the perfect answer, but from seeing the suffering created by the demand for an answer. There may be things you will never fully understand. There may be apologies that never come. There may be reasons that remain unclear. There may be people who never explain themselves honestly. The mind may hate this. It may say, I cannot be free until I know why. But sometimes the need to know why becomes another chain. Sometimes the deepest release begins when you stop asking the past to become clear enough to give you peace. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop making peace dependent on the cooperation of the past. Pain says, something happened. The story says, I cannot live fully until what happened makes sense. Pain says, I was hurt. The story says, the person who hurt me must understand my pain before I can heal. Pain says, I lost something. The story says, because I lost this, my life can never open again. The story turns pain into a contract. It says life must repay you before you can breathe. But life does not always repay in the way the wounded mind demands. This is why clinging to the story can keep a person waiting at a closed door for years. The Buddha's path points somewhere else. It points to direct seeing, not seeing as thinking more, but seeing as noticing what is actually happening inside you. When the memory comes, what happens in the body? When the old story begins, what emotion feeds it? When you repeat the same sentence about your pain, what do you feel you are protecting? When you tell yourself, I will never be free, what part of you believes that suffering is safer than change? This kind of seeing is not intellectual. It is intimate. It brings you close to the machinery of suffering. You begin to notice that the story is not one solid thing. It is made of images, words, sensations, beliefs, and emotional habits. A memory appears. Then a thought interprets it. Then the body reacts. Then another thought confirms the reaction. Then the identity steps in and says, this is me. If you are unaware, the whole chain happens so quickly that it feels like truth. But when mindfulness grows, the chain slows down. You see the links. And once you see the links, you are no longer completely trapped by them. This is why mindfulness is not just relaxation, it is investigation. It is the calm, patient act of watching how suffering is made, not to blame yourself, but to understand. A person who does not understand how fire spreads cannot stop the house from burning. A person who does not understand how the mind turns pain into identity cannot stop living inside the story. Mindfulness shows you where the spark becomes flame. Sometimes the spark is a real memory. Sometimes it is a tone of voice. Sometimes it is a date on the calendar. Sometimes it is seeing someone else receive what you needed. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is success, because success can awaken the fear of losing. Sometimes it is love, because love can awaken the fear of abandonment. The story of pain is clever. It can attach itself to almost anything. It can turn even blessings into warnings. That is why it must be seen, not obeyed blindly. There is a difference between honoring pain and obeying the story of pain. Honoring pain means you give yourself tenderness. You admit what hurt. You do not force yourself to be fine. You allow grief to move through the body. You seek support when needed. You care for the wounded places with patience. Obeying the story means you let pain define what you are allowed to become. You let it close doors before you reach them. You let it speak for everyone you meet. You let it turn caution into isolation. You let it make your future a servant of your past. Many people confuse these two. They think if they stop obeying the story, they are dishonoring the pain. But the opposite may be true. When you keep obeying the story, you may be making your pain work too hard. You are asking it to explain your whole life, protect your whole future, justify every fear, and carry an identity it was never meant to carry. Pain is a signal. It is not a self. It asks to be felt, understood, and cared for. It does not ask to become the ruler of your life. The story of pain often uses the word always. Always rejected, always unlucky, always misunderstood, always alone, always the one who gives more, always the one who gets hurt, always the one left behind. Be careful with always. It is one of the mind's favorite tools for turning a painful pattern into a permanent identity. Always makes the past seem endless. It erases exceptions. It hides moments of kindness, strength, change, and possibility. It takes one wound and stretches it across your entire life. Buddhist wisdom brings you back to impermanence, not as a cold idea, but as medicine. If everything changes, then always is usually a story. A feeling may return often, but it is not always present. A pattern may be strong, but it is not unbreakable. A wound may influence you, but it is not the whole of you. Even the thought, "I cannot heal," appears and disappears. It is not permanent. It visits. It speaks. It fades. If you can observe it, then it is not your entire self. This is where the Buddhist understanding of not-self becomes deeply useful. Not-self does not mean you do not exist. It means the thing you call me is not a fixed, unchanging object. It is made of changing parts: body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Your story of pain is also made of changing parts. It feels solid because you keep gathering those parts and calling them me. But when you look closely, you see movement. Feelings rise and pass. Thoughts rise and pass. Memories rise and pass. Body sensations rise and pass. Even identity shifts depending on mood, place, people, and attention. If the painful self were truly fixed, it would never change for even a second. But it does. There are moments you laugh, moments you forget the pain, moments you care for someone, moments you feel beauty, moments you are curious, moments you are calm, moments you want to begin again. These moments may be brief, but they reveal something important. The story of pain is not the whole truth. It may be loud, but it is not total. The mind may argue, but the pain comes back. Yes, it may, but something coming back does not mean it is you. Clouds come back, rain comes back, night comes back. None of them are the sky. In the same way, sadness may return, fear may return, memory may return, but you are not required to build your identity from every returning weather. Buddhist practice helps you become more like the sky, aware of what passes through but not reduced to what passes through. This is not easy in the beginning because the story of pain often feels morally important. It says, if I let this go, I am saying it was okay. It says, if I stop telling the story, no one will know what I endured. It says, if I become peaceful, the person who hurt me wins. These thoughts can be powerful because they tie suffering to justice. But inner freedom is not the same as declaring the past acceptable. You can still know something was wrong. You can still have boundaries. You can still choose distance. You can still speak truth. But you do not have to keep drinking poison to prove that poison was given to you. Acceptance is not the erasing of moral clarity. It is the ending of self-punishment. Pain may need justice, action, support, or protection. But the story of pain often keeps punishing the one who was already hurt. It replays the wound in the mind. It keeps the body tense. It steals sleep. It blocks joy. It makes new love pay for old harm. It keeps life small. It says it is protecting you, but often it is continuing the injury from inside. This is why Buddhist wisdom is so firm about clinging. Clinging does not keep the past from being wrong. It keeps the past alive in the body. There is a form of suffering that comes from pain, and there is a form of suffering that comes from resisting pain. Direct pain says, this hurts. Resistance says, this must not be here. I cannot feel this. I should be over this. This means I am weak. This ruins everything. Resistance turns pain into a battle against yourself. The pain is already there, and then the mind attacks the fact that it is there. Now there are two pains, the original feeling and the conflict with the feeling. Acceptance reduces the second pain. It does not always remove the first. If grief is present, grief may still ache. If loss happened, loss may still matter. If the body hurts, the body may still need care. But acceptance stops adding the extra violence of denial, shame, and inner argument. It says, this is here. Those three words can be frightening because the mind thinks acceptance means surrendering to pain forever. But actually, this is here is the beginning of honest relationship. You cannot heal what you refuse to meet. The story of pain often lives in time. It reaches backward into memory and forward into fear. It rarely stays in the simple now. It says, because of what happened then, this will happen later. It links past and future with a chain of fear. Mindfulness gently cuts through by asking, what is present now? Maybe a tight chest is present. Maybe sadness is present. Maybe thought is present. Maybe anger is present. But is the whole story present? Is the entire future present? Is the old person who hurt you present in this room? Is the past happening now, or is the body remembering it? These questions are not meant to dismiss pain. They are meant to separate direct experience from mental construction. This separation brings space, and space brings choice. Without space, memory becomes reality. With space, memory becomes memory. Pain becomes pain. Thought becomes thought. Fear becomes fear. None of them need to become identity. The phrase, my story of pain, is powerful because of the word my. The mind claims pain. It says my wound, my betrayal, my abandonment, my sadness, my trauma, my loss, my brokenness. This claiming can feel natural. Pain happened within your life, so it feels personal. But Buddhism asks you to look gently at how ownership can become bondage. The more tightly the mind says "my," the more solid the suffering becomes. The pain is no longer an experience passing through awareness. It becomes a possession the self guards. Sometimes people guard their pain because it is the last connection to something or someone. A grief story may feel like the last thread to a lost person. An anger story may feel like the last defense against injustice. A betrayal story may feel like the last proof that you were not foolish. A childhood pain story may feel like the only witness to what the younger self endured. So the mind says "my" with both sadness and protection. It does not want to lose the story because it fears losing the meaning. But releasing ownership is not losing meaning. It is allowing meaning to mature. At first, meaning may be "this hurt me." Later, meaning may become "this taught me what needs compassion." Later still, it may become "this opened my eyes to suffering in others." And one day, meaning may become quiet, not needing to explain itself all the time. The event remains part of your path, but it is no longer the center of your name. Pain becomes "my story of pain" through language. Listen to the sentences you repeat inwardly. Some sentences heal, some sentences harden. "I was hurt, and I am learning to care for myself" is different from "I am damaged forever." "I feel fear, and I can move slowly" is different from "I cannot trust anything." "This memory is painful" is different from "my life is only pain." Language can either create space or close the door. The words you use inside yourself become the atmosphere your heart breathes. This is why Buddhist practice often values right speech, not only toward others, but also inwardly. The way you speak to yourself shapes the way suffering moves. Harsh inner speech makes pain contract. Wise inner speech allows pain to be held without becoming identity. You do not need to lie to yourself with false positivity. You need truthful, spacious language, language that admits pain without making it permanent, language that respects fear without crowning it king, language that honors the past without letting it devour the present. The story of pain also grows through selective memory. The mind gathers evidence that supports the story and ignores what does not. If the story is "no one cares," the mind may overlook the person who checked on you. If the story is "I always fail," the mind may dismiss the quiet ways you kept going. If the story is "nothing good stays," the mind may not notice small forms of stability. This is not because the mind is evil. It is because the mind tends to confirm what it already believes. Suffering narrows attention. It makes the world look like the wound. Mindfulness widens attention. It does not force you to deny what hurts. It simply asks you to include more of reality. Yes, there is pain. Is there also breath? Yes, there is grief. Is there also the sound of rain, a cup of tea, a person who tried, a moment of rest, a small strength you forgot to count? This wider seeing is not childish. It is not pretending. It is refusing to let pain become the only evidence allowed in the court of your mind. The story of pain often survives by making everything personal. A delayed reply becomes abandonment. A neutral face becomes judgment. A change in plans becomes rejection. Someone else's mood becomes proof that you are unsafe. The mind shaped by pain turns ordinary life into evidence for the old wound. This is exhausting. It means the body lives in constant reaction, not to reality alone, but to the meaning added on top of reality. Buddhist wisdom teaches perception carefully because perception is not always pure seeing. It is seeing mixed with memory, fear, desire, and past conditioning. You are not only seeing what is there, sometimes you are seeing what pain taught you to expect. This is why pausing matters. Before reacting, you can ask, what did I actually see? What did I add? What do I know? What am I assuming? Is this pain from now or pain from before entering now? These questions create a gap between event and story. In that gap, freedom breathes. Pain may need comfort, story may need investigation. This distinction is very useful. When direct pain is present, be kind. Soothe the body. Allow tears. Rest. Speak gently. Reach for support. But when the story begins spinning, investigate. Is this true? Is it always true? What does this story want from me? What does it protect? What does it cost? Who would I be in this moment if I did not add this sentence to the pain? That last question can open a door. Who would you be if sadness was here, but the story "I will always be sad" was not added? Who would you be if fear was here, but the story "I am unsafe everywhere" was not added? Who would you be if memory was here, but the story "My life ended there" was not added? You may not become instantly peaceful, but you may feel space, and space is the beginning of release. The mind may say, but if I stop telling the story, I will forget the lesson. This is another fear, but wisdom does not require endless suffering. A lesson can remain without the wound being reopened every day. You can remember not to place your hand in fire without burning your hand every morning. You can learn discernment without reliving betrayal. You can keep boundaries without rehearsing every reason for them. You can carry wisdom lightly. This is one of the signs of healing. The lesson remains, but the identity softens. At first, the story may have been necessary. It helped you organize chaos. It gave words to something overwhelming. It helped you tell someone, "This is what happened to me." It helped you understand your reactions. Do not hate the story. At a certain stage, it may have served you. But every tool has a time. A cast helps a broken bone heal, but if you never remove it, it weakens the limb. In the same way, the story of pain may help you name the wound, but if you never loosen it, it can weaken your ability to live beyond the wound. Buddhist wisdom often works through direct contact with reality. It brings you back from the story to the sensation, from the sensation to awareness, from awareness to spaciousness. Instead of saying, "I am destroyed," you may notice, "There is pressure in my chest, heat in my face, a thought saying, 'I cannot go on,' and a memory rising." This may sound less dramatic, but it is more precise. Precision weakens the spell of identity. When you name what is actually happening, the mind has less room to turn it into a universe. There is freedom in saying, "A thought is here," instead of, "This is the truth." There is freedom in saying, "Fear is moving through me," instead of, "I am fear." There is freedom in saying, "Pain is present," instead of, "My life is pain." This language does not erase the experience. It places the experience in awareness instead of placing your whole self inside the experience. The story of pain often asks to be repeated. It wants to be told again, reviewed again, defended again. Sometimes telling your story is healing, especially when it has been hidden or denied. But repetition without release can become another form of clinging. You can tell the story so many times that you strengthen the identity more than you soothe the wound. The question is not, "Should I ever speak of my pain?" Of course you may need to speak. The question is this telling helping the pain move or helping the identity stay fixed? You can feel the difference. Healing speech often brings softness, clarity, breath, and a sense of being witnessed. Repetitive clinging speech often brings tightness, heat, more blame, more helplessness, and the need to repeat again soon. One opens space, the other deepens the groove. This is not a rule to silence you. It is a gentle invitation to notice what your own words are doing to your own heart. Pain is intimate, but the story of pain can become public identity. Sometimes people become known by what happened to them. Their suffering becomes the first thing others remember. Their wound becomes their introduction. Their struggle becomes their role in the family, the friendship, or the community. This can feel validating at first, especially if you were ignored before, but over time it can become limiting. You may feel pressure to remain the wounded one because that is how others recognize you. Buddhist wisdom would ask you to look at this with compassion. Are you allowed to change? Are you allowed to be more than the role people understand? Are you allowed to become peaceful even if others still expect your pain? Are you allowed to outgrow the version of you that made sense to everyone else? The answer must become yes. Healing may confuse people who only knew your wound, but your freedom cannot depend on everyone adjusting quickly to your growth. There is pain, and there is the identity that forms when pain is witnessed, repeated, named, and socially reinforced. To leave that identity, you may have to disappoint the expectations built around your suffering. You may have to stop explaining yourself in the old way. You may have to speak less from the wound and more from the wisdom that grew after it. You may have to let people meet a version of you that is not always available for the same sad conversation. This is not arrogance. This is growth. The Buddhist difference between pain and my story of pain is not a small idea. It is one of the central doors to liberation. Because as long as pain and story are fused together, you cannot touch pain without awakening the whole identity. A small sadness becomes your entire past. A small rejection becomes every rejection. A simple uncertainty becomes proof that life is unsafe. But when pain and story separate, you can care for the sadness without drowning in the identity. You can feel the sting without adding a lifetime sentence. You can meet the moment without inviting every old wound to sit at the table. This is how freedom becomes practical. Not dramatic, but practical. A memory comes and you breathe. A thought says, "This is who I am," and you answer, "This is a thought shaped by pain." A feeling rises, and you place a hand on the body instead of building a future from it. Someone disappoints you, and you respond to that person, not to every person who ever disappointed you. A quiet evening arrives, and instead of entering the old story, you let the quiet be quiet. These small changes are not small. They are how the story loses authority. The first arrow may still come. Life will still bring pain. People may still fail you. Loss may still visit. The body may still ache. Memories may still rise. But the second arrow can be understood. The second arrow can be softened. The second arrow does not need to be fired again and again by your own mind. This is not perfect control. It is practice. It is the gradual training of awareness to see suffering before it becomes self. And with time, something beautiful happens. Pain becomes less frightening because it no longer means identity. Sadness can come without convincing you that you are sadness. Fear can come without proving that your whole life is danger. A wound can speak without taking over the room. You begin to trust that experiences can move through you without becoming you. This is the heart of Buddhist freedom. Not a life without pain, but a life where pain is no longer turned into a prison by the story of me and mine. Not a life where memory disappears, but a life where memory no longer owns the present. Not a life where you become untouched, but a life where you are touched deeply and still remain wider than what touched you. And when you truly begin to see this, acceptance becomes less like defeat and more like wisdom. You are not accepting the story that says you are broken forever. You are accepting the direct truth of this moment. You are saying, pain is here, but I do not have to build a self out of it. Memory is here, but I do not have to live inside it. Fear is here, but I do not have to obey it as truth. The wound was real, but the story is not my master. That is where the old home of suffering begins to lose its final power, because the house was never built from pain alone. It was built from pain plus belief, pain plus repetition, pain plus identity, pain plus this is me. And now, through awareness, you begin removing one belief at a time, one repeated sentence at a time, one false permanence at a time, one unnecessary second arrow at a time. You may still feel pain, but you begin to stop becoming the story. And that is a quiet kind of liberation. You may still feel pain, but you begin to stop becoming the story. And this is where another hidden resistance appears, one that many people feel but rarely admit. The moment you stop becoming the story, a strange guilt may rise. It may feel as if you are turning your back on your own suffering. It may feel as if peace is asking you to betray the version of yourself that had to survive. And when you have suffered for too long, acceptance can feel less like freedom and more like abandoning the pain that has been your witness. That is why acceptance can feel so painful at first. Not because acceptance is wrong, but because the heart has confused letting go with betrayal. When you have carried pain for many years, it does not remain only a memory. It becomes a companion. A heavy companion, yes, but still a companion. It sat with you when no one understood. It followed you through silent nights. It explained why you could not trust easily. It gave shape to your anger. It gave language to your loneliness. It became the proof that something real happened. So when Buddhist wisdom gently says, "You can release this," the wounded mind may answer, "Release it? After all I went through, after all it cost me, after all the years I spent carrying it." This is where acceptance feels like betrayal, because part of you may believe that if you stop suffering, you are saying the suffering was not serious. If you stop grieving, you are saying the loss did not matter. If you stop being angry, you are saying the wrong was acceptable. If you become peaceful, you are saying the wound was small. But this is not true. The wound does not need your lifelong suffering in order to remain real. What happened does not need to keep hurting you every day in order to be valid. Pain is not made more truthful by being repeated forever. A scar does not become false because it no longer bleeds. But the mind does not always understand this immediately. The mind may think, if I heal, who will remember what happened? This is especially true when your pain was ignored, dismissed, mocked, minimized, or misunderstood. When no one gave you the comfort you needed, your own suffering may have become the only witness you trusted. You may have carried it like evidence before an invisible court. Every tear, every sleepless night, every defensive reaction, every moment of withdrawal became a way of saying, "See, it was real. See, I did not make it up. See, it mattered." So acceptance may feel dangerous because it asks you to put down the evidence. But Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to deny the evidence. It asks you to stop living inside the courtroom. There is a difference. You can know what happened without spending the rest of your life trying to prove it. You can honor your pain without presenting it again and again to people who may never understand. You can validate your own suffering without needing your life to remain shaped like a wound. The deepest freedom begins when you no longer need the world to agree that you were hurt before you allow yourself to breathe. Acceptance feels like betrayal when suffering has become the way you stay loyal to your younger self. Somewhere inside, there may be a version of you who was hurt, abandoned, confused, rejected, or left alone with feelings too heavy to carry. That younger self may still be waiting for protection, waiting for someone to say, You did not deserve that. Waiting for someone to return and make things right. Waiting for the past to change its face. And because that younger self still feels frozen in the pain, the adult self may feel guilty for moving on. It may feel cruel to step toward peace, while a part of you still feels stuck back there. But true acceptance is not leaving that younger self behind. True acceptance is finally going back with compassion and saying, I see you, I believe you. I will not deny what happened, but I will not keep our whole life trapped here. That is not betrayal, that is rescue. The wounded mind often thinks loyalty means staying in the same emotional place. It thinks love means continuing to hurt. It thinks remembrance means refusal to release. But there is another kind of loyalty, a wiser loyalty, the loyalty that says, because I suffered, I will not keep creating more suffering inside myself. The loyalty that says, because I was hurt, I will learn to be gentle with myself now. The loyalty that says, because life was painful, I will not make pain my only inheritance. This kind of loyalty does not abandon the past. It transforms your relationship with it. Buddhist wisdom is very clear about clinging. It teaches that clinging is one of the roots of suffering. But clinging does not always look like greed. Sometimes clinging looks like grief that refuses to soften because softening feels unsafe. Sometimes it looks like anger that has stayed too long because anger feels like justice. Sometimes it looks like identity built around a wound because the wound feels like proof. Sometimes it looks like repeating the same story because stopping feels like letting someone get away with what they did. This is why acceptance is often misunderstood. People hear acceptance and think it means approval. They think it means saying, what happened was okay. They think it means becoming passive, silent, weak, or indifferent. But Buddhist acceptance does not mean calling darkness light. It does not mean pretending harm was harmless. It does not mean smiling at injustice. It means seeing reality as it is, without adding the extra suffering of denial, resistance, and endless inner war. Acceptance says, this happened, it hurt, it had consequences, and now I must decide whether I will keep letting it rule my inner life. That decision can feel like betrayal because the pain may have become a monument. People build monuments to remember what matters. In the same way, the mind can build a monument out of suffering. It may say, I will never let this go because this pain represents what I lost. But there is a difference between a memorial and a prison. A memorial helps you remember with respect. A prison keeps you from living. If your pain has become a place you visit with awareness, it can teach you. If it has become a place you cannot leave, it controls you. The Buddha's teaching does not remove compassion from pain. It brings more compassion, not less. It says, yes, suffering exists. Yes, your heart was touched. Yes, the wound mattered. But do not add another lifetime of bondage to the wound. This is a deep mercy. Because if you believe healing is betrayal, you may keep punishing yourself out of loyalty to what happened. You may keep your joy small. You may reject peace when it comes. You may distrust calm because calm feels like forgetting. You may avoid happiness because happiness feels disrespectful to the pain you endured. But ask yourself gently, who taught you that your suffering needs your unhappiness as proof? If someone hurt you, must you keep hurting yourself in order to show that it mattered? If life took something from you, must you also give life your peace, your future, your softness, your ability to love, your ability to rest? If a season broke your heart, must every season after it bow down to that brokenness? At some point, continuing to suffer no longer protects the past. It only steals from the present. Acceptance feels like betrayal when anger has become your only form of power. For many people, Anger arrives after pain because the heart needs to defend its dignity. Anger says, "That was not right." Anger says, "I deserved better." Anger says, "I will not let this be ignored." In this way, anger can be useful at first. It can wake you up from numbness. It can help you set boundaries. It can help you stop accepting harm. But when anger becomes your permanent home, it slowly burns the person carrying it. This is difficult because letting anger soften may feel like losing power. You may think, if I stop being angry, I become weak. If I stop holding this fire, I let them win. But Buddhist wisdom would ask, who is being burned by this fire now? If your anger helps you take wise action, listen to it. If it helps you protect your life, respect it. But if your anger keeps replaying the wound long after the moment has passed, if it steals your sleep, poisons your relationships, and turns your mind into a battlefield, then it is no longer only protecting you, it is consuming you. Peace is not the enemy of justice. Peace is the place from which you can see clearly. A mind trapped in rage may react, but a mind grounded in awareness can respond. It can set boundaries without becoming cruel. It can walk away without needing revenge. It can remember without being ruled by memory. It can say, "This was wrong," without letting wrongness become its whole personality. Acceptance also feels like betrayal when grief has become the last thread of love. Sometimes people are afraid to heal because they fear healing will weaken their connection to what they lost. If they stop crying, will it mean they stopped caring? If they feel joy again, will it mean they have forgotten? If they build a new life, will it mean the old life no longer mattered? These fears can make the heart cling to sorrow as if sorrow is proof of love. But love is not measured only by pain. Love can remain as gratitude. Love can remain as tenderness. Love can remain as wisdom. Love can remain as the way you live, the way you treat others, the way you carry forward what mattered. Grief may be one expression of love, but it is not the only expression. If you believe grief must stay sharp forever for love to stay real, you may deny love the chance to become spacious. Buddhist wisdom teaches impermanence not to make the heart cold, but to help the heart hold life more wisely. Everything changes. The form changes. The closeness changes. The body changes. The relationship changes. The season changes. But love, when purified by awareness, does not have to remain trapped in the shape of pain. It can become blessing. It can become compassion. It can become a quiet strength that says, "This mattered deeply, and because it mattered, I will live with more presence, not less." Acceptance feels like betrayal when you believe suffering is the price of meaning. Some people have endured so much that pain becomes the deepest thing they know. They begin to feel that suffering makes them serious, wise, special, or spiritually deep. They may not say this openly, but somewhere inside, they may fear that without pain, they will become ordinary. Without the wound, what will make them different? Without the struggle, what will give their life weight? Without the story, what will people see? This is another hidden attachment. The mind can become proud of its suffering. Not proud in a shallow way, but proud because suffering became proof of endurance. Look how much I survived. Look how deeply I feel. Look how much I understand. And truly, survival deserves respect. But the purpose of wisdom is not to remain wounded so you can feel deep. The purpose of wisdom is to see clearly enough that you do not need pain to prove your depth. A peaceful person is not a shallow person. A calm heart is not an empty heart. A healed mind is not a mind without history. Sometimes the deepest people are those who no longer need to display their pain to be real. They have suffered, yes, but they do not force every conversation to kneel before their suffering. They have wounds, yes, but they do not turn every wound into a throne. They have memories, yes, but they do not let memory speak louder than the present moment. This is the maturity acceptance invites. But the transition is not easy. After long suffering, your whole inner system may be organized around the wound. Your habits, your reactions, your relationships, your expectations, even your dreams may have been shaped by it. So when acceptance begins, it may feel like the floor is being removed. You may ask, if I am not fighting this anymore, what do I do with myself? If I am not defending my pain, who am I? If I am no longer waiting for someone to admit they hurt me, where does my energy go? These are honest questions. They show that suffering has been doing more than hurting you. It has been organizing you. It has given your mind a task. Acceptance removes the old task before the new life feels stable. This gap can feel empty. It can feel like betrayal because the old self does not yet trust the new self. The old self says, do not put this down. We know how to live with it. The new self says, but we are tired. The old self says, at least this pain is familiar. The new self says, familiar does not mean free. This inner conflict is part of healing. Do not mistake it for failure. When a person has lived in a dark room for years, even sunlight can hurt the eyes at first. That does not mean the sun is dangerous. It means the eyes need time. In the same way, acceptance may feel uncomfortable because your inner life is adjusting to a reality where pain is no longer the center. Buddhist practice gives you a gentle way through this. It does not demand that you drop everything at once. It asks you to observe the clinging, feel the guilt, notice the fear of betrayal. Sit with the part that says, if I accept this, I lose something. Then ask softly, what do I believe I am losing? Maybe you believe you are losing proof. Maybe you believe you are losing identity. Maybe you believe you are losing connection. Maybe you believe you are losing the right to be angry. Maybe you believe you are losing the seriousness of what happened. Once you see what you fear losing, you can answer it with wisdom. If you fear losing proof, remind yourself, my pain does not need to continue for my past to be real. If you fear losing identity, remind yourself, I am more than the wound. If you fear losing connection, remind yourself, love can remain without constant suffering. If you fear losing anger, remind yourself, I can keep the lesson without keeping the fire in my own body. If you fear losing the seriousness of what happened, remind yourself, peace does not make the past smaller, it makes my life larger. This kind of inner reassurance matters. Healing is not only insight, it is repeated re-education of the heart. The wounded mind has heard the old story many times. It will not trust a new truth after hearing it once. You must speak wisdom repeatedly, not as a slogan, but as medicine. Slowly, the heart begins to understand that acceptance is not abandonment. It is protection from further inner harm. Acceptance can also feel like betrayal when you are still waiting for the past to be repaired. There may be a secret belief inside you that says, if I hold on long enough, something will change. They will apologize. They will understand. Life will give back what it took. The old wound will finally receive the perfect answer. And sometimes, yes, repair happens. People apologize. Clarity comes. Relationships heal. But often, the exact repair the heart wants does not arrive. Then the question becomes painful. Will you remain chained to a repair that may never come? Buddhist wisdom does not ask this question harshly. It asks with compassion. It knows the heart longs for things to be made right. But it also knows that clinging to what cannot be controlled creates more suffering. Acceptance means you stop making your freedom dependent on someone else's awakening. You stop placing the key to your peace in the hands of a person who may never know how to hold it. You stop waiting for the past to become kind before you become kind to yourself. This is not fair, and it is okay to admit that. Healing often asks work from the person who was hurt. That can feel unfair. But there is a difference between unfairness and impossibility. It may be unfair that you have to heal what you did not choose, but it is still possible to heal. It may be unfair that someone else's actions shaped your pain, but it is still possible to stop giving their actions the power to shape every future breath. It may be unfair that closure never came from outside, but it is still possible to create an inner closure based on truth, compassion, and release. Acceptance feels like betrayal when you confuse release with permission. The mind says, if I release this, I am allowing it. But release does not give the past permission. The past already happened. Release gives your present self permission to stop being dominated by what happened. This is a completely different thing. You are not freeing the event from responsibility. You are freeing yourself from endless captivity to the event. Think of a heavy stone carried in the arms. You may say, I cannot put this down because someone gave it to me unfairly. That may be true, but your arms are still the ones aching now. Putting it down does not mean the person was right to give it to you. It means you are no longer willing to let your whole life be shaped by carrying it. This is the mercy of acceptance. There is another layer to this. Sometimes pain becomes a way to avoid the unknown. As long as you remain attached to suffering, you know what your life is about. You know your role. You know your complaint. You know your emotional position. But if you accept, you must enter a life where your energy is no longer organized around pain. You may have to discover joy. You may have to make choices. You may have to risk new relationships. You may have to create meaning instead of only explaining damage. That can feel frightening. So the mind may call acceptance betrayal when it is actually afraid of responsibility. This does not make the mind bad. It makes it human. Freedom can be frightening because freedom asks, now what? Once you are not spending all your energy fighting the past, you must decide how to live. This is a sacred question, but it can feel heavy. The wounded identity had answers. The free self must learn. This is why acceptance must be paired with patience. Do not expect yourself to release a long-held identity in one emotional moment. Do not expect the heart to trust peace immediately. Do not force yourself to feel grateful for lessons that still hurt. Acceptance is not a performance. It is a practice of telling the truth without turning the truth into a cage. You may begin with a very simple form of acceptance. This happened. Not, this was okay. Not, I am over it. Not, I understand everything. Just, this happened. Then, it hurt me. Then, it shaped me. Then, I have been carrying it. Then, I can begin to relate to it differently. These sentences move slowly because the heart moves slowly, but each one brings you closer to freedom. Acceptance also means accepting your resistance to acceptance. This is very important. Many people suffer because they are not only in pain, they are angry at themselves for not being past the pain. They think, I should have let go by now. I should be wiser. I should be stronger. Why does this still affect me? But this inner pressure only creates another layer of suffering. Buddhist wisdom would say, notice that too. Notice the resistance. Notice the shame. Notice the fear of betrayal. Let even that be included in awareness. When everything is allowed to be seen, nothing has to hide in the dark. If acceptance feels like betrayal, you do not need to pretend it feels beautiful. You can say, a part of me feels guilty for healing. That honesty is already acceptance. You can say, a part of me is afraid that peace will erase my pain. That awareness is already a doorway. You can say, a part of me still wants the world to know how much it hurt. That truth, held gently, is not weakness. It is the beginning of maturity. The more honestly you meet these parts, the less they need to control you. The part that fears betrayal does not need to be silenced. It needs to be understood. It needs to hear again and again that healing does not mean the pain was fake. It needs to hear that peace does not erase the past. It needs to hear that you can stop suffering without becoming disloyal to yourself. It needs to hear that the wound is allowed to be real, even if your life becomes beautiful afterward. That last truth may be the hardest. Your wound is allowed to be real, even if your life becomes beautiful afterward. Your past is allowed to be painful, even if your future becomes peaceful. Your loss is allowed to matter, even if laughter returns. Your betrayal is allowed to be wrong, even if trust slowly grows again. Your grief is allowed to be sacred, even if joy begins to sit beside it. This is not contradiction. This is wholeness. The mind, trapped in suffering, thinks only one thing can be true at a time. Either I hurt or I heal. Either it mattered or I move on. Either I remember or I betray. Buddhist wisdom teaches a wider way. Pain and peace can both be part of the path. Memory and freedom can exist together. Compassion for the wounded self and movement toward a new life can happen at the same time. You do not have to choose between honoring what happened and allowing yourself to live. Acceptance becomes betrayal only when you believe suffering is the only honest response to suffering. But there are other honest responses. Wisdom is honest. Boundaries are honest. Compassion is honest. Rest is honest. Rebuilding is honest. Silence can be honest. Joy can be honest. A peaceful life after pain can be one of the most honest responses of all, because it says, what happened mattered, but it will not be allowed to become the whole story. There is deep courage in that, not the loud courage of proving something to others, but the quiet courage of no longer using your own pain as a weapon against your future. The courage to stop asking suffering to validate you. The courage to let the past be real without making it your ruler. The courage to disappoint the part of you that still believes healing is disloyal. The courage to say, I can love the self who suffered without remaining trapped in the suffering. This is where Buddhist acceptance becomes an act of compassion. You are not forcing the heart to forget. You are allowing the heart to stop bleeding for the sake of proof. You are not telling the old wound to disappear. You are telling it, you do not have to carry my whole identity anymore. You are not betraying the pain. You are ending the extra pain created by clinging, and slowly acceptance begins to feel different. At first, it may feel like dropping your guard. Then it may feel like guilt. Then it may feel like emptiness. Then it may feel like quiet. Then, one day, it may feel like mercy. The mercy of not needing to repeat the story every day. The mercy of not needing to keep your body tense to prove you were hurt. The mercy of not needing an apology before you breathe. The mercy of not needing pain to be your name. This mercy does not come all at once. It comes in small moments when you choose not to reopen the wound unnecessarily. When you remember without feeding the fire. When you validate yourself without demanding that suffering remain visible. When you allow one peaceful breath without suspicion. When you let a good moment be good, even though painful moments came before it. When you realize that the past can be part of you without being all of you. That is when the feeling of betrayal begins to soften. Because the heart slowly learns that acceptance is not turning away from the wounded self. It is turning toward that self with more love than suffering ever could. Suffering may have kept the wound alive, but acceptance begins to care for the one who was wounded. Suffering says, stay here with me forever. Acceptance says, I will not abandon you, but I will not let this be the end of us. And maybe that is the truest healing. not rejecting the pain, not worshipping the pain, not denying the pain, but holding it with enough wisdom that it no longer has to become your whole life. Acceptance does not betray your suffering. Acceptance betrays the lie that you must suffer forever to prove that you once suffered deeply. Acceptance does not betray your suffering. Acceptance betrays the lie that you must suffer forever to prove that you once suffered deeply. And once that lie begins to weaken, another hidden force appears inside the mind. It is more subtle than fear, more difficult to admit than grief, and often more protected than pain itself. It is the ego's secret attachment to being wounded. This is not easy to hear, because no one wants to think they are attached to their wound. The heart says, "I did not choose this pain." And that is true. You may not have chosen what happened. You may not have chosen the loss, the rejection, the betrayal, the disappointment, the loneliness, the years of survival, or the inner heaviness that followed. But sometimes, after pain enters the life, the ego quietly begins to use it. Not because you are bad, not because your pain is fake, not because you enjoy suffering, but because the ego can turn almost anything into identity, even sorrow. The ego does not only attach to pride, success, beauty, praise, money, knowledge, or being right. It can also attach to being wounded. It can say, "This pain makes me different." It can say, "This wound explains me." It can say, "This suffering gives me depth." It can say, "This story gives me a place in the world." And slowly, without your full awareness, the wound becomes more than something that happened. It becomes something the ego uses to feel solid. In Buddhist wisdom, ego is not simply arrogance. Ego is the deep habit of making a fixed self out of changing experiences. It says, "This is me, this is mine, this is who I am." It takes thoughts, feelings, memories, roles, victories, failures, and wounds, then wraps them together and calls the bundle self. So when suffering stays for long, the ego may begin to include suffering in that bundle. It says, "I am the one who was hurt. I am the one who was abandoned. I am the one who was betrayed. I am the one life treated unfairly. I am the one who understands pain more than others." At first, this may feel like honest recognition, but over time, it can become a hidden attachment. The dangerous thing about this attachment is that it does not feel like attachment. It feels like truth. It feels like dignity. It feels like self-protection. It feels like justice. It feels like memory. It feels like loyalty to what happened. But if you look closely, you may notice that the ego does not only want the pain to be acknowledged. It wants the pain to remain central. It wants the wound to keep explaining you. It wants the story to keep giving you a shape. It wants the old injury to remain a kind of throne from which the self can speak. This is where suffering becomes complicated. The wound hurts, but it also gives the ego a position. It gives the ego a reason to say, "I am special because I have suffered," or "I am separate because no one understands me," or "I am wiser because I have been through more," or "I am allowed to stay guarded because I was hurt." Some of these statements may contain truth. Pain can teach. Pain can deepen compassion. Pain can make a person more alert. But the ego takes a lesson and turns it into a crown. It takes survival and turns it into superiority. It takes a wound and turns it into a name. This is why the ego may resist healing. Healing threatens the ego's favorite story. If the ego has built itself around being wounded, then peace feels like losing status. If pain has become the reason you feel unique, then healing may feel like becoming ordinary. If suffering has become your proof of depth, then calm may feel shallow. If being hurt has become your explanation for every reaction, then acceptance may feel like losing the defense that protects you from responsibility. This is not a reason to shame yourself. It is a reason to become deeply honest. Because ego attachment grows in darkness, it weakens when seen clearly. The ego loves certainty, even painful certainty. It would rather say, "I am broken," than sit in the open space of, "I am changing." It would rather say, "I can never trust," than face the delicate work of learning discernment. It would rather say, "This is just who I am," than admit, "This is a pattern I learned." It would rather keep the old wound as a permanent identity than enter the unknown field of healing. Why? Because a fixed identity feels safe. Even a painful fixed identity gives the ego something solid to hold. But life is not fixed. Buddhism reminds us again and again that all things are changing. The body changes, feelings change, thoughts change, roles change, relationships change. Even the story you tell about yourself changes. But the ego fears this flow. It wants to freeze life into a self-image. It says, "This is me," and when the self-image is wounded, it says, "This wounded me is the real me." That is where suffering deepens, because now healing is not only a matter of easing pain. Healing becomes a threat to who the ego thinks you are. This is why some people defend their pain more fiercely than they defend their peace. You may offer them another way to see themselves, and they may reject it. Not because they are hopeless, but because the wound has become familiar ground. They know how to speak from it. They know how to gain sympathy through it. They know how to avoid risk through it. They know how to explain every closed door with it. But peace asks them to stand without that old explanation. Peace asks them to be present without the drama of injury. Peace asks them to become larger than the wound. And the ego says, "But if I am no longer this wound, what am I?" That question can feel terrifying. The ego's secret attachment to being wounded often shows itself through repeated self-description. Listen carefully to how a person introduces themselves to themselves. "I am someone who always gets hurt. People never choose me. I cannot trust anyone. I am too damaged. I have been through too much. I am different from people who have easy lives." These sentences may feel like honesty, but they may also be rituals of identity. Each time the sentence is repeated, the wounded self becomes stronger. The ego hears itself named again and again, and it feels confirmed. This is why Buddhist practice pays close attention to thought and speech. Words are not empty. They shape inner reality. When you keep calling yourself by your wound, the mind begins to bow to that name. When you keep saying, "This is who I am," the heart stops searching for other possibilities. When you keep repeating the old pain as your primary identity, you may not notice the quiet ways you are refusing to let a new self emerge. And yet the goal is not to replace one ego identity with another. Buddhism is not asking you to move from "I am wounded" to "I am perfectly healed and superior." That would only be another ego costume. The deeper invitation is softer. Stop making a fixed self out of any passing condition. Pain is present sometimes. Strength is present sometimes. Fear is present sometimes. Calm is present sometimes. Confusion is present sometimes. Wisdom is present sometimes. None of them needs to become the whole of you. The ego wants to own experience. Awareness simply witnesses it. This is the difference between saying, "I am wounded," and saying, "A wound is being felt." The first creates identity. The second creates space. The first becomes a prison. The second becomes a doorway. When you say, "I am wounded," the wound becomes the center of the self. When you say, "Pain is present," You are still honest, but you are no longer trapped inside the pain as your only name. The ego may also attach to being wounded because the wound gives moral advantage. This is a very subtle point. When a person has been hurt, they may unconsciously begin to feel that their suffering makes them more righteous, more innocent, or more entitled to be understood without question. Their pain becomes a shield against correction. It says, "Because I suffered, no one can challenge me." It says, "Because I was hurt, my reactions are always justified." It says, "Because I have endured, I do not need to examine how I may now be hurting myself or others." This is where pain can become spiritually dangerous. A wound can make you humble, but it can also make you self-protective in a way that refuses accountability. It can open the heart, but it can also harden the ego. It can deepen compassion, but it can also create a hidden belief that your suffering makes you exempt from growth. Buddhist wisdom does not allow this kind of hiding. It offers compassion, yes, but it also offers clear seeing. It says, "You were hurt, and now you must look at what you are doing with that hurt." This is not blame. It is liberation. Because if your wound has become an excuse for every reaction, you remain trapped. If your past has become the reason you never question your present behavior, you remain chained to the past. If your suffering has become a shield against honest reflection, then the wound has become the ego's hiding place. And as long as the ego hides inside the wound, healing will feel like exposure. The wounded ego often says, "Do not ask me to change. Look at what I have been through." But wisdom says, "Because of what you have been through, you deserve to change." The wounded ego says, "My pain explains everything." Wisdom says, "Your pain explains some things, but it does not have to control everything." The wounded ego says, "I cannot help being this way." Wisdom says, "You can begin gently, one moment at a time." The wounded ego says, "If I let go, I lose myself." Wisdom says, "If you let go, you may finally meet yourself without the wound standing in front." There is a kind of identity that forms when suffering becomes a source of attention. This must be spoken about with tenderness. Some people did not receive love when they were joyful, calm, or simply present. They received concern only when they were in crisis. They received tenderness only when they were visibly hurting. They received patience only when they were breaking down. So the ego learned, pain makes me seen. It learned, if I am okay, I disappear. And once the ego learns this, it may resist peace because peace feels like invisibility. This does not mean the person is pretending. It means the nervous system and the ego have learned a painful bargain. Suffering brings connection, but connection based only on suffering is unstable. It keeps the person tied to the role of the wounded one. It makes healing feel socially risky. It creates the fear that if you become peaceful, people will stop caring. But true love should not require constant injury. True connection should not need you to remain wounded in order for you to matter. Buddhist compassion helps you see this without self-hatred. It allows you to say, "Of course I wanted to be seen. Of course I wanted someone to notice my pain. Of course I held on to the language that finally brought care. But I can learn to be seen in peace too. I can learn to receive love without needing to bleed emotionally for it. I can learn to matter even when I am not in crisis." That is a profound shift. To believe you can matter without suffering. The ego also attaches to woundedness because woundedness can protect you from trying. If you believe you are too damaged, then you do not have to risk beginning again. If you believe people will always hurt you, then you do not have to risk opening carefully. If you believe life is already against you, then you do not have to risk hope. If you believe healing is impossible, then you do not have to face the slow discipline healing requires. Pain becomes not only a wound, but a hiding place from possibility. Possibility can be frightening because it asks something from you. It asks for movement. It asks for responsibility. It asks for patience. It asks for the courage to live without the old excuse. The ego may prefer the sadness it knows to the freedom that asks it to grow. This is why the wounded identity can feel strangely comfortable. It lowers the demand of life. It says, "I cannot." It says, "Do not expect too much from me." It says, "I am this way because of what happened." But underneath those sentences there may be a quiet fear of discovering that you are capable of more than your pain has allowed. And that discovery can be both beautiful and frightening, because if you are capable of more, then a new life becomes possible. And if a new life is possible, then the old identity must loosen. The ego does not like loosening. It wants to survive. It wants to remain the main character of your inner story. If it has been playing the role of the wounded one for years, it will not step down easily. It may create guilt. It may create fear. It may create suspicion. It may tell you peace is fake, healing is betrayal, joy is unsafe, and acceptance is weakness. It will say anything to keep its position. This is why mindfulness is necessary. You cannot argue with the ego in the same language it uses. The ego loves argument because argument keeps it central. You must observe it. You must notice how it moves. Notice when it turns pain into importance. Notice when it uses hurt to avoid responsibility. Notice when it prefers sympathy over freedom. Notice when it repeats the wound because silence feels empty. Notice when it rejects peace because peace does not give it a dramatic role. Observation weakens identification. When you can say, "The wounded ego is speaking," you are no longer completely inside it. You have become the witness. That witness is not cold. It is not cruel. It is spacious. It sees the wounded ego with compassion, but it does not obey every demand. It can say, "I understand why you cling. I understand why you fear being ordinary. I understand why pain gave you a sense of self. But we are not here to live forever as a wound." The ego's attachment to being wounded can also appear as comparison. It may compare suffering with others. It may say they do not understand real pain. It may feel secretly offended when others speak of their struggles. It may minimize other people's wounds because it wants its own wound to remain special. This is painful to admit, but important. When suffering becomes identity, the ego may begin protecting its rank in the world of pain. It wants to be the one who suffered most, endured most, understood most deeply. But pain is not a competition. The moment suffering becomes a competition, compassion begins to shrink. Buddhist wisdom opens the opposite door. It teaches that suffering is universal, not identical, but universal. Everyone carries something. Everyone meets loss, fear, aging, uncertainty, disappointment, and change. When you see this deeply, your own wound does not become less real. It becomes connected to the human condition. Your pain stops isolating you and begins to soften you. This is a major movement from ego to compassion. Ego says, "My pain makes me separate." Compassion says, "My pain helps me understand others." Ego says, "No one hurts like I hurt." Compassion says, "Many beings know sorrow in different forms." Ego says, "My wound makes me special." Compassion says, "My wound can make me kind." This does not reduce your suffering. It releases the need to use suffering as a badge. There is dignity in pain, but there is danger in worshipping it. There is wisdom in remembering, but there is danger in making memory your altar. There is strength in survival, but there is danger in refusing to become anything beyond a survivor. The ego can take the most sacred parts of your healing and turn them into identity. Even spiritual language can become ego's clothing. A person can say, "I am healing," but secretly become attached to being seen as the wounded healer, the deep one, the one with the most powerful story. The ego does not disappear because the language becomes spiritual. It simply learns new words. This is why Buddhist wisdom keeps returning to direct seeing, not the image of healing, not the identity of being wise, not the performance of depth, direct seeing. What is happening now? Is there clinging? Is there fear? Is there pride in pain? Is there resistance to peace? Is there a secret wish to be recognized through suffering? Is there a part of you that does not want to release the wound because the wound gives you importance? These questions are not comfortable, but they are cleansing. They bring humility, and humility is medicine for the wounded ego. Humility does not mean insulting yourself. It means seeing clearly that even your pain can become a place where ego hides. It means admitting, something in me has become attached to this wound. That admission can feel sharp at first, but it is not condemnation. It is freedom beginning. Because what is unconscious controls you. What is seen can be held differently. The ego's secret attachment to being wounded also survives through resentment. Resentment gives the ego a sense of power because it keeps the offender, the loss or the unfairness present in the mind. It says, "I will not let this go." But often resentment is not true power. It is a way of keeping the self attached to the wound. The ego may prefer resentment because resentment gives it a story to return to, an enemy to focus on, a reason to feel morally awake. Without resentment, the ego may feel empty. It may not know what to do with the energy that was once spent rehearsing pain. Buddhist wisdom does not demand that resentment vanish by force. It asks you to understand its cost. What does resentment do to your body? What does it do to your sleep? What does it do to your ability to love? What does it do to your face, your breath, your future? Does it truly protect you, or does it keep you tied to what hurt you? Does it bring clarity, or does it keep the wound fresh? Does it make wise action possible, or does it keep you circling the same fire? When resentment is seen clearly, it begins to lose its holiness. You stop treating it as proof of self-respect. You begin to see that self-respect may actually require putting it down, not because the past was right, but because your life deserves to be more than a reaction to the past. This is another thing the ego fears, being more than a reaction. The wounded ego is reactive. It defines itself against what happened, against who left, against who failed, against who did not understand, against what life took. But a free life cannot be built only in reaction. At some point you must ask, what do I love? What do I value? What do I want to practice? What kind of mind do I want to cultivate? What kind of presence do I want to bring into the world? These questions move you from wound-centered identity to life-centered awareness. The ego may resist because these questions do not keep the wound at the center. They ask you to create instead of only defend. They ask you to live instead of only explain. They ask you to become responsible for the quality of your attention. And in Buddhism, attention is everything. What you feed with attention grows. If you feed the wounded identity every day, it becomes stronger. If you feed awareness, compassion, patience, and wise action, those qualities become more available. This does not mean ignoring pain. It means feeding pain only with the kind of attention that heals, not the kind that hardens. There is attention that is like warm water on a wound, cleaning it gently. There is also attention that is like scratching the wound open again. The ego often prefers the second kind because it keeps the wound active. Awareness learns the first kind. A healed relationship with pain does not need to perform. It does not need to announce itself constantly. It does not need to win every conversation. It does not need to be the most wounded person in the room. It can speak when speaking is useful and be silent when silence is kind. It can remember without displaying. It can feel without becoming dramatic. It can protect boundaries without building identity around defense. This is not emotional deadness, it is maturity. The wounded ego often fears maturity because maturity is quieter than pain. Pain can be loud. Pain can command attention. Pain can create intensity. Maturity can feel too simple at first. It says, feel this, learn from it, do not become it. Act wisely, release what burns you, return to the breath. The ego may call this boring because it does not provide the same drama. But peace is often quiet. Healing is often quiet. Real freedom rarely performs for applause. This is why the ego may keep looking for conflict. Conflict gives wounded identity something to do. If there is conflict, the ego can feel justified. It can say, see, I knew I had to be guarded. It can return to its old role. But without conflict, the ego has to face itself. It has to sit in stillness. It has to feel the emptiness beneath the story. It has to admit that some of the battle is now being continued from within. This is painful, but it is also a doorway. When outer enemies disappear and inner war remains, you begin to see that the work is no longer only about what happened. It is about the self that formed around what happened. This is exactly where Buddhist practice becomes powerful. It does not stop at blaming the outer world. It turns the light inward, not to deny the world's harm, but to free the mind from carrying that harm in every breath. The ego's attachment to being wounded begins to loosen when you stop rewarding the wounded identity with constant belief. A thought arises. I am too hurt to change. Instead of bowing, you notice it. A feeling arises. I need this pain to be understood. Instead of becoming it, you hold it gently. A story arises. Without this wound, I am nothing. Instead of obeying, you ask, is that really true? This is how the ego loses power. Not through violence, but through non-identification. Non-identification means you no longer confuse every inner movement with yourself. There is fear, but fear is not the whole self. There is hurt, but hurt is not the whole self. There is ego, but ego is not the whole self. There is a story, but the story is not the whole truth. The more you see this, the more space opens, and in that space you can choose. You can choose to validate pain without building identity from it. You can choose boundaries without bitterness as your home. You can choose memory without worship. You can choose wisdom without superiority. You can choose tenderness without helplessness. You can choose strength without remaining hardened. You can choose to be someone who suffered, not someone who is only suffering. The ego may still whisper, but then who are you? And perhaps the answer is not a fixed sentence. Perhaps you do not need to replace the wounded identity with another rigid identity. Perhaps the answer is, I am here, I am aware, I am learning, I am not finished, I am not only what happened, I am not required to make a permanent self out of temporary pain. That answer may feel less dramatic, but it is more alive. The ego wants a statue. Awareness wants a river. A statue is fixed. It cannot grow. It cannot bend. It cannot breathe. A river moves. It changes shape without losing its nature. It meets rocks and keeps flowing. It does not need to announce itself as wounded by every stone it passed. It simply continues. Buddhist wisdom invites you to become more like the river, not untouched, but moving. Not careless, but free, not without memory, but not imprisoned by memory. The secret attachment to being wounded is healed through compassion and clear seeing together. Compassion alone may comfort the wound, but leave the ego hidden. Clear seeing alone may become harsh if it lacks tenderness. Together, they create balance. Compassion says, "I understand why you became attached to this wound." Clear seeing says, "But this attachment is now causing suffering." Compassion says, "You were trying to protect yourself." Clear seeing says, "But protection has become a cage." Compassion says, "We will not shame the wounded self." Clear seeing says, "We will not let the wounded self rule forever." This balance is the middle way. Not denial, not obsession, not self-blame, not self-excuse, not clinging, not cold rejection. A gentle seeing that is strong enough to tell the truth and kind enough to hold what trembles. As this attachment softens, you may feel grief, because the wounded ego, for all its problems, gave you something. It gave you a role. It gave you an explanation. It gave you a way to feel important when you felt powerless. It gave you a way to demand recognition when you felt unseen. Releasing it may feel like becoming empty for a while. Let that emptiness be there. Do not rush to fill it with a new identity. Sometimes emptiness is not loss. Sometimes it is space being cleared. In that space, new qualities can grow, not the dramatic qualities of the wounded ego, but quieter ones: patience, discernment, humility, soft strength, real compassion, honest boundaries, a deeper ability to listen, a lighter way of moving through the world. These qualities may not shout, but they are powerful. They do not need suffering as their throne. They arise from awareness. Eventually you may see that being wounded was never your deepest identity. It was a condition, a painful condition, a meaningful condition, a condition that shaped you, taught you, challenged you, and perhaps changed the direction of your life. But still a condition, not the final truth of who you are, not the permanent self, not the whole sky. And when this becomes clear, the ego loses its secret grip. You no longer need pain to